Derek Voss leaned close to Elena's ear in the middle of 400 people and said it like he was commenting on the weather. You're going to smile, stay quiet, and sign whatever they put in front of you. Because if you don't, I will make sure every person in this room believes you were the architect of all of it. She felt the champagne flute go cold in her hand. The chandeliers above the plaza's grand ballroom threw light across 5 years of her life and made it look like a lie. She turned to look at him, really look, and saw nothing she recognized. Not the man who proposed on a rooftop in April. Not the man who said her name like it meant something. Just a stranger wearing her fiancé's face, already calculating his next move while she was still absorbing this one. She pulled the ring off her finger. A liar doesn't deserve my love. She set it on the tray of a passing waiter and walked away. If you've ever stood in a room full of people and realized you were completely alone, if you've ever had someone you trusted use your name like a weapon, then you already know what Elena felt in that moment. This is her story, and it's only just beginning. Before we go any further, if this story is what you've been looking for, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Elena Marlowe had spent 11 years building a reputation that could survive almost anything. She was a forensic accountant, the kind that corporations hired when they suspected someone on the inside was stealing and needed someone from the outside to prove it without leaving fingerprints on the accusation. She was good at her job because she was patient. She knew how to read numbers the way other people read faces. She knew when something was being hidden, and she knew how to find it without tipping off the person doing the hiding. She had survived a father who gambled away her college fund her junior year. She had survived being laid off at 29 when the firm she worked for dissolved overnight and she had to rebuild her client list from scratch. She had survived her mother's death, a bad apartment in Queens, and 3 years of working 60-hour weeks before anyone in her industry took her seriously. What she had not survived, what she had never seen coming, was Derek Voss. She met him at a conference in Chicago, 4 years before the night at the Plaza. He was presenting on financial transparency in mid-sized private equity firms, and he was charming in the specific way that attractive, intelligent men in expensive suits are charming when they know the room is watching them. Elena had not been impressed by the suit. She had been impressed by the fact that when she challenged one of his slides publicly, in front of the room, he didn't get defensive. He laughed. He said, "She's right. Let me walk that back." That was the moment. That was the thing that got her. She thought she had found a man who didn't need to be right more than he needed to be honest. She was wrong, but she wouldn't know that for 4 years. And by the time she figured it out, her name was already on documents she had never seen. Derek courted her slowly. He was never pushy. He remembered things: her coffee order, the name of her college roommate, that she got migraines when it rained in the fall. He introduced her to his world carefully, one dinner at a time, one weekend in Connecticut, one art opening, where he steered her away from certain conversations so smoothly that she never thought to wonder why. His father, Victor Voss, was mentioned rarely and always briefly. Derek described him as a retired businessman who had stepped back from the family's various holdings. Old money, he said. Old problems. He kept things vague, and Elena, who was not a woman who pried into things that weren't her business, let it go. She should not have let it go. They got engaged 14 months before the Plaza Gala. It was April, rooftop restaurant, skyline behind them, the works. She said yes because she meant it. Because she genuinely believed that Derek, the first person in her adult life, who had chosen her without needing anything back from her. That was the lie she told herself. The lie he had constructed carefully over 4 years. She said yes, and he kissed her, and the champagne came out, and she thought, finally. The engagement party was small. The wedding planning was slow. Derek kept pushing the date first because of a deal he was closing, then because of a family matter, then because he wanted to find the right venue. Elena was busy enough with her own work that she didn't push back hard. She trusted him. That was the arrangement between them. He trusted her professionally, she trusted him personally, and neither of them had given the other reason to doubt that. Until 6 weeks before the gala, when a client forwarded her an email by mistake. It was addressed to a regulatory attorney, and it referenced a holding company called Marlowe Consulting Partners. Elena did not own a company by that name. She did not have a consulting firm. She had never registered anything under Marlowe Consulting Partners, had never filed anything with that name, had never spoken that name aloud in her life. Her name was in the company title. That was all she knew. She spent 3 evenings researching it quietly, carefully, without telling Derek. What she found was a tangle of shell companies, routing accounts, and a paper trail that would have impressed her professionally if it hadn't made her physically ill, personally. Marlowe Consulting Partners had received transfers from no fewer than 6 private investment accounts over the past 2 years. It had paid vendors that didn't appear to exist. It had filed tax documents with her home address listed as the principal place of business. Someone had built a financial crime and put her name on the front door. She didn't confront Derek. Not yet. She was a forensic accountant. She knew that confronting someone before you understood the full picture was how people got away with things. She kept documenting. She kept her face neutral and her evenings occupied. She told Derek she was slammed with a new client, and he believed her because she had always worked late and he had stopped really looking at her schedule. The gala was a charity event for a hospital foundation, the kind of Manhattan event where a table cost $30,000 and people wore their philanthropy like jewelry. Derek had bought 2 seats. He wanted Elena there at his side, visible. She understood now why he had been so insistent about attending. She understood when she arrived and saw the guest list and realized that 3 of the investors whose money had passed through Marlowe Consulting Partners were in that room. He wanted her there as proof, visible, smiling, legitimizing. If anyone looked twice at the paper trail, there she would be, his fiancée, a respected forensic accountant, attending a hospital charity gala. It was a frame and she was the picture inside it. She stood in that ballroom for 40 minutes before Derek found her at the bar. He had been working the room, shaking hands, laughing with men in tuxedos. He came to her with 2 fresh glasses of champagne and a smile that she now read for what it was, performance, and he said she looked beautiful, and she said thank you, and she waited. She didn't have to wait long. His hand found the small of her back, and he angled her away from the nearest group and lowered his voice to that intimate register he used when he wanted something. A few people are going to come talk to us tonight. Marcus Hale, possibly James Corbin. When they do, just be warm, okay? You don't need to talk business. I just need you present. She kept her voice level. What does Marcus Hale know about Marlowe Consulting Partners? The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds on Derek Voss's face was a lifetime. She watched every calculation he ran in that brief window. She saw the moment he decided not to deny it. Where did you hear that name? I'm a forensic accountant, Derek. Where do you think? Another silence. He took a slow sip of his champagne. Then he smiled, not warmly, not the smile she had believed in for 4 years. Something colder. Something that had always been there behind the one he'd been showing her. You're going to smile, stay quiet, and sign whatever they put in front of you. Because if you don't, I will make sure every person in this room believes you were the architect of all of it. She stood there for a moment. Just a moment. She felt the weight of the ring on her finger. She thought about 4 years. She thought about April, the rooftop, the skyline. She thought about how much of herself she had given to a man who had spent that entire time building a trapdoor beneath her feet. She pulled the ring off and set it on the tray of a waiter passing with empty glasses. A liar doesn't deserve my love. She walked away from him. She walked through the crowd with her chin level and her heart hammering, and she did not look back. She made it approximately 30 feet before she walked directly into a man she had never met. He was older, tall but not aggressively, so the kind of tall that comes from posture and bearing rather than height. He had silver hair cut close and a face that had weathered into something that was no longer handsome in any conventional sense, but commanded attention the way old stone commands attention. He was wearing a dark suit, no pocket square, no cufflinks worth noticing. Nothing that advertised. Everything about him was economy. He caught her by the arm steadily to keep her from stumbling. Easy, he said. Not loud, not warm, exactly, just present. She looked up at him. I'm fine not, he said. But you will be. He released her arm. He looked past her toward where Derek was still standing, and something changed in his expression, not dramatically, not theatrically. A small tightening around the eyes. The kind of expression that only people with long experience at managing rage have learned to minimize. Victor Voss, he said, and extended his hand. She shook it because her body did it before her brain caught up. Then her brain caught up. "You're his father, I am," he said. "And you are the woman my son just threatened." I was standing close enough to hear. She absorbed that. "Then you heard what I said to him." I did. His eyes came back to her face. They were gray, she noticed. Not warm gray? The gray of old concrete. It was overdue. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. A survival skill she had cultivated over 11 years. Victor looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not pity, not interest exactly, something more careful. The look of a man who was running an assessment and not hiding that he was doing so. "Come," he said. "There's a lounge on the 3rd floor that will be empty at this hour. You look like you could use 10 minutes away from this room. I don't know you. No. But you know that what just happened wasn't your fault, and you know that man over there is going to make your life difficult in the very near future, and I know things about that you don't." He paused. "I'm not offering you a favor. I'm offering you information." Elena Marlowe had not gotten where she was by being reckless. She had also not gotten where she was by turning down information when it was offered by people who clearly had it. 10 minutes, she said. The lounge was exactly as empty as he'd said it would be. 2 leather chairs, a low table, the sound of the gala muffled through the floor. Victor poured her a glass of water from a carafe on the bar and set it in front of her without asking whether she wanted it. She drank half of it without thinking. She looked at him across the table. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know he invoked your name in the company structure without your knowledge." "You knew about that." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew there was a structure. I didn't know he had used your name until recently." He held her gaze without flinching. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to confirm it. I confirmed it this morning." Elena's hands were steady. She had trained herself out of visible trembling years ago. Courtrooms required it, but her chest felt like something was sitting on it. "You're saying you've been investigating your own son." "I'm saying I found a pattern in my organization's accounts that led to my son and from my son to you. A name on documents you never signed." "I didn't sign them," she said immediately. "I know. How do you know?" "Because I had the signatures analyzed," he said simply. "Professional forgery. Not bad forgery. The kind that takes practice." She set down the water glass. "He forged my signature." Yes. The air in the room had a weight to it. She sat with that, with the specific shape of that betrayal. She had suspected it. Suspected is different from knowing. Knowing has a different texture. It sits differently in the body. "What's he stolen?" she asked. Because that was the question. If there was forgery, there was theft. Victor looked at her without expression. "A significant amount. Enough to matter. He's been routing it through the Marlowe structure and from there into accounts that don't connect back to my organization. Which means if it's found, the trail leads to you and stops. While he keeps the money." Yes, she stood up. She couldn't sit still for this part. She walked to the window, the lights of Fifth Avenue spread out below, all that cold, brilliant Manhattan light, and she pressed her palm flat against the glass and stood there for a moment. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said. "Not a question." "He's been doing it for longer than you've known him," Victor said from behind her. "That's the part I'm still building the picture on. How long, how deep, who else?" She turned around. "Why are you telling me this? I'm a liability to you right now. If you expose your son, your organization's accounts get subpoenaed. If you help me, you become a witness in a fraud case." Victor looked at her with those gray concrete eyes and said, "Because he used your name. And that's not something I can walk past." The simplicity of it hit her harder than she expected. Not because it was romantic, not because she trusted him, but because after 4 years of a man who justified everything and explained every betrayal into something logical and contained, here was a man saying, "I cannot walk past this." 4 words, no footnotes. She sat back down. "What are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing anything tonight. Tonight you walk out of here with your head up and you go home. Tomorrow you retain a criminal defense attorney. Not a civil one criminal. Someone who handles federal white-collar cases. I know attorneys. I know you do. I also know that what's coming is going to move faster than you think it will, and the next 72 hours matter." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a card on the table. "No name on it, just a phone number. If you need documentation of what I know not for public use, not for the press, but for your own legal defense, call that number." She looked at the card. "And what do you get out of this?" Victor stood. He buttoned his jacket. He said, "I get to look at myself in the mirror." He left first. She sat in that empty lounge for another 5 minutes, alone, listening to the muffled gala below. She thought about her career, her name, the document she hadn't signed. She thought about the ring she'd left on a waiter's tray. She thought about 4 years. Then she picked up the card and put it in her clutch and walked back downstairs. Derek was still in the ballroom. She saw him from across the room, still working, still smiling, still performing. He caught her eye from 30 feet away, and something moved across his face. She recognized it now, the calculation. The assessment of whether she was going to be a problem. She met his eyes and didn't look away and didn't smile. He looked away first. She called an attorney the next morning. Not one, she already knew her professional contacts were too close to the industry. Derek moved in, and she couldn't afford a conflict of interest. She went to a firm she had used as an expert witness once, 3 years prior, and she called the managing partner directly and said she needed a criminal defense attorney for a white-collar case, federal jurisdiction likely, and she needed to start that morning. By noon, she was sitting across from a woman named Catherine Park, who had handled 3 SEC cases in the past 18 months and had a reputation for being relentlessly methodical. Elena laid out what she had found: the company, the routing, the signature analysis she now knew existed. Catherine listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. When Elena finished, Catherine folded her hands on the desk. "You didn't know. I had no knowledge of any of it until 6 weeks ago. And the signature analysis, this came from Victor Voss. Through an intermediary. Not directly." Catherine nodded. "We need that analysis. Not through an intermediary. Authenticated, chain of custody intact." She paused. "You understand something that calling Victor Voss makes you adjacent to an organized crime figure. I understand that, and you're willing to accept that risk." Elena looked at her. "I'm already adjacent to financial fraud I didn't commit. I think the question of risk has moved." Catherine almost smiled. "Fair point." Elena's phone buzzed on the table. She looked down at it. "Derek." She showed Catherine the screen. Catherine shrugged the shrug of someone who had seen this before. "Don't answer. Don't block, don't reply. Let it ring." It rang 4 more times that afternoon. Then it stopped. That evening, she called the number on Victor's card. A man answered, not Victor. A voice she didn't recognize, even careful. "Yes, I need the signature analysis," she said. "Authenticated." Chain of custody, a pause. Then Ms. Marlowe, "Give me 24 hours." She gave him 24 hours. The next morning, a courier arrived at her apartment building with a sealed envelope. No return address. Inside, a 4-page forensic document analysis prepared by a handwriting expert she had actually heard of, a woman who testified in federal court regularly. The analysis concluded with 93% certainty that the signatures on the Marlowe Consulting Partners Incorporation documents and subsidiary filings were not produced by Elena Marlowe. The paper quality, the ink dates, the pressure patterns, all of it documented, all of it time-stamped. She called Catherine immediately. Catherine called her own experts to verify authenticity. Then she filed a preliminary notice with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The notice did 3 things. It established Elena's position as a victim, not a participant. It triggered an inquiry into Marlowe Consulting Partners. And it started a clock, because once federal inquiries start, certain people in certain industries begin to move. Derek Voss was one of those people. He showed up at her apartment building 2 days later. She didn't let him up. He stood on the sidewalk and called her from the lobby phone and said her name 6 times in 6 different tones: warm, then confused, then apologetic, then clipped, then cold, then something that was not quite a threat, but wanted to be. She said, "My attorney will be in contact with yours," and hung up. He did not come back to the building. But 3 days later, her name appeared in a financial newsletter, a gossip column that ran inside the investment industry, the kind of thing that circulated between executives and compliance officers. The column suggested that a forensic accountant named Elena Marlowe was under informal investigation for possible involvement in a private equity fraud scheme. No specifics, no sources named, just enough to start a whisper. She read it at 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee she couldn't finish. She knew exactly who had planted it. She called Catherine. Catherine had already seen it. "This is harassment," Catherine said. "It's also potentially defamatory. We're going to document every instance." "He's trying to get ahead of it," Elena said. "Yes." "Which means he's scared." Catherine paused. "That's good news." "Scared people make mistakes. Elena hung up the phone and stood in her kitchen for a long moment. Outside her window, New York was doing what it always did, loud, indifferent, moving. She thought about Marlowe Consulting Partners. She thought about 4 years of being chosen and seen and valued, and how none of it had been real. She thought about the look on Derek's face in that ballroom when he said, "You're going to smile and stay quiet," like it had never once occurred to him that she might not. She thought about Victor Voss in a chair across a low table, saying, "I cannot walk past this." And she thought about how much that mattered and how complicated it was that it mattered. She poured the cold coffee down the drain and made a fresh pot. She had work to do. The forensic work was something she could control. She began building her own parallel documentation, not for her defense. Catherine had that covered, but for her own understanding of the full scope. She was a forensic accountant. She didn't need to be told to document. She documented the way other people breathed. She pulled every public filing associated with Marlowe Consulting Partners. She cross-referenced the vendor names, 9 of them, all fictitious, all with bank accounts, that she traced as far as public records would allow. She built a timeline, month by month, transaction by transaction, going back 26 months. She found the first routing entry dated 3 weeks after Derek had proposed. She sat with that for a long time. He had proposed and then 3 weeks later filed incorporation documents in her name. She thought about that sequence. She thought about the rooftop and the skyline and the champagne and herself saying yes and meaning it. She thought about whether he had proposed because he loved her or because he had already decided she was useful and wanted to formalize the proximity. She didn't cry. She had cried twice in the first 3 days, once in the shower the morning after the gala, once at 2 in the morning when she woke up and the reality of it descended without the buffer of activity. After that, she did not cry. Not because she was suppressing it, because she was past it. What she felt now was not grief. What she felt was something colder and more focused, and it frightened her slightly because she recognized it. It was the same state she entered when she was deep in a case, when she could see the shape of a fraud and just needed the documents to catch up to what she already knew. She was in a case. The case was her own life. The 7th day after the gala, Victor called her directly. She hadn't expected that. The number showed up as an unknown, but she answered. She had been answering unknowns all week because Catherine kept using various numbers. Ms. Marlowe. His voice was the same as she remembered. Even low, no preamble, Mr. Voss. I understand the forensic documentation arrived. It did. My attorney has verified it. Good. A pause. Derek has made contact with 2 of the investors whose money passed through your company structure. He's attempting to manage the narrative. I know. The newsletter column. That's one component. Another pause, longer this time. He's also contacted a man named Raymond Childs. Childs works in regulatory compliance. The kind of contact who can slow down an inquiry from the inside. She absorbed that. He's trying to suppress the investigation. He's trying to buy time. How do you know this? He said, I have been in this industry for 40 years. Miss Marlowe, I still have eyes. She paced across her kitchen. Why are you calling me? Because you need to know that this is moving faster on multiple fronts than your attorney may be aware of. And because I think you're capable of handling that information and acting on it usefully. She stopped pacing. That's a very specific thing to think about someone you met 8 days ago. I had you looked into, he said. It was not an apology. 3 years ago, you took a case against Meridian Capital that every other firm in your field declined because the liability exposure was too high. You won. You were right and you proved it. And you walked away with your reputation intact and Meridian's CFO in federal custody. I know what you're capable of. She was quiet for a moment. You looked into me 3 years ago. I looked into you when my son first mentioned you. She let that land. The implication was layered and she took a moment to peel it. Victor had investigated her when Derek brought her into his orbit, which meant Victor had suspected, even then, that Derek was doing something that would eventually pull someone like Elena into its radius, which meant Victor had known for longer than he was saying that his son was dirty. You knew he was stealing, she said. The pause that followed told her more than anything he said next. I suspected, but not specifically, not specifically. Not enough to act, enough to watch. And you watched while he built a fraud case with my name on it. He didn't answer that immediately. When he did, his voice was slightly different, not softer, but more careful. Like someone picking their way across something that might not hold weight. I made decisions I can't undo. I can only control what I do from here. She thought about that. She thought about how easy it would be to be furious with him and how little good that fury would do her right now. The man Derek contacted Childs. Can you document that contact? Not in a way your attorney could use, but you could. How? Childs has a history. Meridian Capital was one of his clients. She froze. She had worked the Meridian case. She had interviewed Raymond Childs. She pulled the name from her memory like a drawer opening. He had been a peripheral figure, a compliance consultant with borderline involvement that she had documented, but that the intern attorney had ultimately declined to pursue because the case was already strong without him. She had his file, she had documents, she had a deposition that had never been used. You're connecting dots for me, she said. I'm showing you where to look, he said. What you do with it is yours. She said, I'll be in touch, and ended the call. She stood in her kitchen in the quiet of the apartment and felt something she hadn't felt since before the gala. Not safety, not comfort, something more functional than that. She felt like she was standing on solid ground instead of a trapdoor. She went to her filing cabinet and pulled the Meridian folder. Raymond Childs was 23 pages deep, but she found him in 12 minutes because she had always been fast at this. She read his entry. She read the deposition transcript. She read her own notes from the interview, her handwriting in the margin, reluctant but not deceptive. Knew more than he said, not the architect. She had written that 4 years ago, and it had been the right call. He wasn't the architect. He was a fixer. Someone people called when they needed something smoothed over inside a system. Derek had called him. She photographed the relevant pages, secured the originals, and sent Catherine an encrypted file with a cover note, Childs. Meridian adjacent, Derek contacted him post-gala verify. Catherine responded in 20 minutes on it. Elena closed the filing cabinet. She looked at the clock, 9:43 in the evening. She had been working for 11 hours. She sat down at the kitchen table and ate half a sandwich she'd made 3 hours ago and forgotten about, and she thought about the shape of the thing she was inside. It was not over. It was barely started. The documentation was building. The legal machinery was turning. And Derek Voss had not yet understood, not really, not fully, that he had used her name because he believed she was manageable. That was his fundamental error. He had looked at her across 4 years and seen a capable woman who trusted him, and he had mistaken trust for tractability. She was not tractable. She never had been. She finished the sandwich. She made notes on 3 more documents. She went to bed at midnight and slept better than she had in 2 weeks, which was not saying much, but it was something. The next morning, her phone rang at 7:15. Unknown number. She answered. It was not Victor, it was Derek. His voice was different from the lobby call. The tone she had cataloged before, warm, confused, apologetic, clipped, cold, and the thing that wanted to be a threat were all gone. What was left was something stripped, raw in the way that had nothing to do with honesty and everything to do with desperation. You went to a lawyer, he said, immediately. Elena, don't. I need you to understand that this doesn't have to go where it's going. There are ways to handle this that keep both of us out of. Both of us, she said. There is no both of us, Derek. You built a company in my name and forged my signature on 27 documents and called it both of us. Silence. I have the forensic analysis, she said. I have the signature comparison. I have documentation of your contact with Raymond Childs. And I have an attorney who filed a preliminary notice with the U.S. Attorney's Office 9 days ago, she paused. This is not a negotiation. This is a phone call I'm recording. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. She counted. You're making a mistake, he said. But the certainty was gone. It was reflex now, not conviction. I made a mistake 4 years ago, she said. I'm correcting it. She ended the call. She sat at her kitchen table in the morning light with the phone face down in front of her and her hands perfectly still, and she stayed there for 2 minutes, just breathing. Just letting the adrenaline move through her and out the other side. Then she picked up the phone and called Catherine and told her about the call and the recording. Catherine said, excellent. Outside, New York was already loud. The sun was up. The day was running. Elena Marlowe looked out the window at all of it and thought, this is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of something she had not chosen but would not walk away from. She was a forensic accountant. She knew where bodies were buried. She knew how to read a trail. This time the trail led somewhere she had never expected. and she was already following it. Catherine Park did not celebrate small wins. It was one of the first things Elena had noticed about her, the way she received good news, the same way she received bad news, with a nod and a follow-up question. So when she called Elena at 8:40 that same morning and said, "The recording is clean. We can use it," Elena knew from the flat steadiness of Catherine's voice that this was significant. How significant? Elena asked. It establishes consciousness of guilt. He called you attempting to negotiate silence. That's not what innocent people do. A pause. It also means he knows the documentation exists, which means he's going to move. I know. When I say move, I mean he has resources. He has connections inside regulatory bodies. He has a father who has spent 4 decades building relationships in this city that cross jurisdictions in ways that are difficult to map. Even if Victor Voss is cooperating with you informally, that doesn't mean his organization can't be used against you by people within it who are loyal to Derek. Elena was standing at her kitchen window. The street below was doing its morning thing: delivery trucks, a woman walking 3 dogs, a man arguing into a phone. The ordinary world. You're saying, I shouldn't trust the help I'm getting. I'm saying you should understand where it comes from, Catherine said. Victor Voss is not a public defender. He has his own reasons for everything he does. That doesn't make him wrong or unreliable. It makes him complicated. And complicated people in complicated situations require margin. Margin, Elena repeated, distance between what you need from him and what you give him access to. Elena thought about that. She thought about Victor in the lounge at the plaza, the 4 words, the card, the gray eyes that assessed without apologizing for it. She thought about the phone call the night before. The way he had said, "I'm showing you where to look," without any pretense, that he was doing it from pure altruism. He told me he had me investigated 3 years ago, she said. A brief silence on Catherine's end. He told you that directly. Yes. Interesting. Catherine's voice was thoughtful, in the way that courtroom attorneys get thoughtful. It meant she was filing something away. He's being transparent about things he doesn't have to be transparent about. That's either a sign of genuine good faith or it's a very sophisticated play. I know which one I think it is, Elena said. Good. Hold that thought and don't act on it until we have more ground under us. Catherine shifted. The child's connection? I've got someone pulling his current client list. If Derek engaged him post-gala, there will be a billing record somewhere. Childs is careful, but he's not invisible. Give me 48 hours. 48 hours. Elena looked at the clock on the microwave. 48 hours from now, it would be Thursday morning. A week and a half since the gala. The world she had built over 11 years felt like it was pressing from all sides, and she was standing in the middle of it with her arms out, trying to hold the walls. 48 hours, she said. Fine. She spent the morning at her desk. She had 3 legitimate client cases still in progress. A manufacturing firm in New Jersey suspected an inventory manager, and a hotel group in Connecticut was dealing with a procurement irregularity, and she could not afford to let those slip. Her professional reputation was already bleeding from the newsletter column Derek had planted. Every day she didn't produce work was a day the whisper could get louder. She worked for 3 hours. The hotel case was straightforward. She had most of the documentation. It was a matter of organizing the timeline. The New Jersey case was thornier, and she found herself grateful for that. Thorny problems required full attention. Full attention was the only thing that interrupted the replay of Derek's voice. On the phone that morning. You're making a mistake. At noon, she got a text from a number she didn't have saved. She knew whose it was. Childs met with Derek's attorney yesterday. Lasted 2 hours. Location, a private club on East 62nd. You should tell your lawyer quickly. She forwarded it to Catherine with a 1-line note from the source I told you about. Catherine replied in 4 minutes. Already pulled the visitor log. Verifying. Thank you. Elena set the phone face down and stared at the hotel procurement spreadsheet for a moment. Then she picked the phone back up and typed to the unsaved number. How are you getting this? Reply came faster than she expected. My son is not as discreet as he believes. She thought about that for a long time. About what it meant to be the father of a man like Derek Voss. About what 40 years of building something looked like when you finally had to look at what it had produced. She did not text back. Victor Voss sat in the back office of a restaurant in Carroll Gardens that had been in his family's orbit for 22 years. It was Tuesday. On Tuesdays, The restaurant was closed to the public, which meant the dining room was quiet, and the only people in the building were people he had either employed or trusted for a long time, which were not always the same category. Across from him sat a man named Sal Ferrante, who had been his consigliere for 16 years and who had the physical quality of an old radiator, solid, reliable, not particularly warm, and always present when the temperature dropped. Sal was looking at Victor with an expression that Victor recognized as concern dressed up as neutrality. "You should have told me about the Marlowe structure before you told her," Sal said. "I told her what she needed to know. You told a civilian outside this organization that your son has been skimming from the family's accounts. You told her before you told me." Victor looked at him. "She's not a civilian in the way you mean. She's the person whose name is on the documents, which makes her a liability, which makes her a victim." Sal was quiet for a moment. He was the kind of man who knew when to be quiet, which was one of the reasons Victor had kept him for 16 years. What's she doing with the information? Using it correctly. She retained Catherine Park. Sal's expression shifted slightly. That's a serious attorney. She's a serious woman. Another silence. Sal turned his coffee cup on its saucer twice, a habit Victor had watched him perform 10,000 times over 16 years. "Victor, there are men in this organization who are not going to understand why you're helping the woman your son used as cover. There are men who are going to see it as soft. I know. And there are men who are loyal to Derek. Not many. But some." Victor's eyes came up. "How many?" "3 that I've confirmed. Probably more at the margins." Sal met his gaze steadily. "Tommy Greer. He's been running communications for Derek on the side for the past 8 months. Luis Cantu the same. And Marco Bidetti, who I think doesn't know the full picture but has been told enough to be a problem." Victor sat with that. 3 men. 3 men inside his organization running parallel communications for his son for 8 months. 8 months meant this had started before the gala, before Victor had begun his own quiet investigation, before any of this had a name or a shape. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I've been watching," Sal said. "Because when you started pulling financial records 6 weeks ago, I pulled personnel records." Victor looked at him. "You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. I wanted to be sure." Sal leaned forward slightly. "Victor, what Derek has done to this organization financially, I can put a number on it. Roughly. It's bad. Not crippling, but it's bad enough that if it goes public, there are partnership agreements with legitimate businesses that have clauses. I know the clauses. Then you know that 3 of our legitimate holdings could be clawed back. The real estate fund, the logistics partnership, and the security consulting group. Those are clean businesses. People's jobs. People who don't know anything about anything." Victor stood. He walked to the window. The restaurant's rear window looked out on a small garden, overgrown at this time of year, brown and indifferent. He stood there and looked at it. He had spent 40 years building this thing. Not always cleanly, not always in ways he was proud of. But the legitimate side, the businesses that employed actual people, that paid actual taxes, that existed as real things in the world, those he had built on purpose. As something to leave. Something that could outlast the parts of his life he could not fully justify. Derek had taken money from the accounts that funded those businesses, had routed it through a fraudulent structure with a borrowed woman's name, and in doing so, had planted a bomb under the thing Victor had spent 20 years trying to make legitimate. "He doesn't know what he's done," Victor said. "He knows exactly what he's done," Sal said. Victor turned around. "He doesn't know the scope of the consequences. He thinks he's stolen money. He doesn't understand that he's potentially unraveled the entire legitimate side." He paused. "Because he's never cared about the legitimate side. He's never understood why I cared about it." Sal was quiet. "He always saw it as cover," Victor said, "legitimacy as camouflage. He never understood that I wanted it to be real." Victor. He sat back down. He pressed his palms flat on the table. He looked at his hands, the hands of a 71-year-old man who had made most of his worst decisions before he was 40, and had spent the 30 years since trying to build something that would survive what he'd done. "I need to talk to him. That's not advisable right now. Not until we know who else he's contacted. I need to look at my son and tell him." Victor stopped. He pressed his lips together. He started again. "I need him to understand what he's destroyed." Sal looked at him with the expression of a man who had known Victor Voss for 16 years, And understood had always understood that underneath all of it, underneath the reputation and the silence and the 40 years of controlled authority, there was a man who had made the specific mistake of loving his son more than was prudent. I'll set up the meeting, Sal said. On my terms. Neutral ground. And you don't go alone. Fine. And Victor. Sal waited until Victor looked at him. If this reaches the federal level and with Catherine Park involved, you're going to have to make a choice. The organization or the evidence. Victor said nothing. You can't protect both. I know, Victor said. Elena found out about the meeting because Victor told her. He called on Thursday morning 47 hours, after Catherine had said 48, which she noticed and said he was meeting with Derek on Friday afternoon. Why are you telling me, she asked. Because you should have the information. That's not an answer. He was quiet for a moment. Because after the meeting, things will move in ways that affect you, and I want you to be positioned. She walked to her desk and sat down. Outside, a truck was reversing on her street, that percussive beeping. She pressed one hand over her other ear. What are you going to say to him? What he needs to hear, and if he doesn't receive it the way you intend. Then I'll know what I'm dealing with, Victor said. And so will you. She sat with the phone against her ear and thought about the strange geometry of this herself. Derek, Victor, all of them orbiting the same wreckage from different angles. You need to be careful, she said. If Derek knows you're sharing information with me, and he has people inside your organization who are loyal to him. I'm aware of the personnel situation. Are you aware that this puts you at risk from two directions? The federal case and your own organization? Yes, and you're proceeding anyway, yes. She rubbed her face with one hand. Why? The pause before he answered was the longest he had given her. She had begun to understand that his pauses were not hesitation, they were precision. He did not speak until he knew what he meant. Because this is the last decision I make as the man I used to be, he said. Everything after this will be different. I intend to make sure this one is right. She didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't sure she was supposed to say anything. She thought about Catherine's warning complicated people, complicated situations, margin, and she thought about Victor Voss standing at a window in Carroll Gardens looking at an overgrown garden, which she could not have known about, but somehow felt was accurate. Call me after, she said. I will. The meeting happened in a private room at a hotel in Midtown that Sal had booked under a name that connected to nothing. Victor arrived first. Sal was with him, and a second man, quiet and large, who stood near the door with the specific stillness of someone professionally trained to be ready without looking ready. Derek arrived 12 minutes late. He came in with his jacket open and his phone still in his hand, and he put the phone away when he saw his father's face. He had not expected Sal to be there. He covered the surprise quickly. Derek had always been good at covering. But Victor had spent 71 years reading people, and 4 decades reading this person specifically, and he saw it. Derek sat. He looked at his father. You look tired, Derek said. I am tired, Victor said. A silence settled between them that had the specific texture of silences between people who have been avoiding something for a long time. Derek broke it first. She went to an attorney, I know. She has documentation. I know what she has. I know where it came from. Something moved across Derek's face. He looked at Sal, then back at his father. You gave her the signature analysis. I authenticated it. Derek leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms, a gesture Victor had watched him make since he was 11 years old, defensive and performative at once. So you're helping her build a case against me. I'm correcting what you did. What I did. Derek's voice had an edge to it that he wasn't trying to hide now. I built something. I built a structure that worked, that moved money without leaving traces. That would have destroyed her, Victor said. A woman who knew nothing. A woman who was available. Derek said it flatly, without remorse, the way someone states a logistical fact. Victor looked at his son. Really looked. He had spent years looking past certain things, looking at the parts of Derek that were redeemable or promising or at minimum manageable, and this was the moment he knew. It was the moment when he stopped doing that. When he let himself see the whole picture, without the parts he'd been cropping out. You used her name, Victor said. You forged her signature on 27 documents. You built a fraud case around her identity and planned to let her take the consequences if it collapsed. She was protected while she was with me. She was exposed because of you. Derek's jaw tightened. I was building something. I needed a clean name outside the family's orbits, someone credible, someone with a professional reputation that would hold up to scrutiny. She was perfect. She was right there. She was your fiancée. She was useful, Derek said. And then, catching something in his father's expression, something that closed like a door, he added, more carefully, I cared about her. Don't. I did. Those things aren't. Don't, Victor said again. His voice had not risen. It did not need to. Don't tell me you cared about her in the same breath you described choosing her for her clean name. I've done things in my life I can't justify. I know what self-deception sounds like. Don't do it in front of me. Derek went quiet. He uncrossed his arms and put his hands flat on the table. Outside the private room, the hotel was doing what hotels do: distant elevator sounds, the murmur of a hallway conversation. Normal world. What do you want from this meeting? Derek asked. I want you to understand what you've done, Victor said. Not to her. What you've done to this organization. The legitimate holdings, the real estate fund, the logistics partnership. You put those at risk. The money you moved came through accounts that fund those businesses. Derek blinked. Once. I was careful about the routing. You weren't careful enough. Or you didn't understand the chain. Or you didn't care. Victor leaned forward. Which one? Derek didn't answer. That told Victor more than any answer would have. You didn't know, Victor said. Not gently. You didn't know what you were pulling from because you never learned what was built. You saw the money and you didn't look at the structure it came from. You needed money that wasn't traceable back to you. I understand. What you didn't understand is that some of the money in those accounts represents legitimate partnership agreements with people who have nothing to do with this family's other activities. And those partnerships have clauses, discovery clauses. If a federal investigation touches those accounts, it won't get that far. Victor looked at him. It already has. The silence that followed was of a different quality from the one before. Derek's hands on the table were very still. He was calculating. Victor could see it, had always been able to see it, the specific micro-movement behind Derek's eyes when he was running numbers in his head. How far? Derek asked. Catherine Park filed preliminary notice with the U.S. Attorney's Office 12 days ago. Derek closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. She moved fast. She's a serious attorney. And you helped her. I'm going to keep helping her. Derek looked at his father. The performance, the ease, the charm, the layered competence had dropped away in pieces over the course of this conversation, and what was left underneath was something younger and rawer and angrier. The face of someone who had been told no for the first time in a long time. You're choosing her over your own son. I'm choosing the right thing, Victor said. That distinction matters. She's nobody to you. She's a woman you met at a party. She is a woman you victimized. That's enough. Derek pushed back from the table. He stood. His chair scraped against the floor, a small, ugly sound. He was not the man from the gala anymore, smooth and calibrated and sure of the room. He was a man who had just been told that the escape route he'd counted on was closed. You're going to regret this, Derek said. Victor did not stand. He stayed seated, hands flat on the table, and he looked at his son with the expression of a man who had already done his grieving for this moment. Sit down, he said. Sit down, Derek. Something in Victor's voice, not volume, not force exactly, but a quality of finality that had nothing theatrical about it, made Derek stop. He stood behind the pushback chair, and his hands gripped the back of it, and he looked at his father, and for a moment he was 15 years old, and had broken something that couldn't be fixed. He sat. There is a way through this that limits the damage, Victor said. For you and for this family. That is not my first concern, but it is a concern. If you cooperate with the federal inquiry, full cooperation, complete documentation, you proactively clarify Elena's role as uninvolved, there is a path. Cooperation, Derek said. The word in his mouth had a specific flatness. Yes, you want me to hand myself to the U.S. attorney. I want you to stop making this worse, and I want you to clear her name. Those are not negotiable. Derek looked at the table. He was quiet for longer than Victor expected. Then, and if I don't? Victor held his gaze. Then I give them everything I have. Derek laughed. It came out wrong, not confident, not dismissive. Crack down the middle. You'd do that, Derek said. Your own son. You stopped being only my son the day you forged a woman's name on a federal document. You became someone who did a specific thing with specific consequences. Victor paused. I love you. That's not in question. And I'm telling you what I will do regardless. Derek stood again. This time Victor didn't tell him to sit. He watched his son button his jacket, that habitual gesture of composure, and he watched Derek become the other version of himself again. Or try to. The managed version. The version that knew how to walk out of a room. I need time, Derek said. You don't have much. 48 hours. Victor looked at Sal. Sal gave the smallest possible nod agreement, acknowledgement. 48 hours, Victor said. And Derek, don't contact Elena Marlowe. Derek's eyes came back to him. Or I make the call to Catherine Park's office before the 48 hours end. Derek walked to the door. The large, quiet man near it stepped aside. Derek opened it, and then he stopped, one hand on the door, not turning around. You know what you're ending, he said. If this goes where you're pointing it. You know what goes down with me. Yes, Victor said. I do. Derek walked out. The door closed behind him. Sal waited for a count of 10. Then he said, he's not going to cooperate. No, Victor said. He's not. So what do we do? Victor sat in the quiet room for a moment. He thought about 40 years. He thought about the legitimate businesses, the jobs, the real things he had built toward the end of something he couldn't name out loud. Atonement was too clean a word for it, too religious, too resolved. It was something quieter than that, something more functional. The desire to leave something real in exchange for what he'd taken. Derek had put a torch to it, not on purpose, maybe, but without caring enough to know what he was burning. We give him his 48 hours, Victor said, and while we give them to him, I make calls. The real estate fund's general counsel is a man named Peter Walsh. I've known him for 12 years. I'm going to call him and tell him there may be a federal inquiry that touches certain accounts, and I'm going to recommend he prepare documentation that establishes the fund's operations as independent of any irregularities. Sal was quiet, absorbing this. I'm going to make those calls for all three entities, Victor said, before Derek does anything that makes it worse. Victor, if you tip Walsh, I know what I'm doing. It looks like obstruction. It looks like a man protecting innocent third parties from the consequences of his son's actions, which is what it is. Victor stood. He was tired, the specific tiredness of someone who has been managing a slow disaster for weeks and has only just allowed himself to feel the weight of it. Get me Walsh's number and get me a car. Elena's phone rang at 7 that evening. She had been sitting with a glass of water and the hotel procurement case and had made almost no progress on either for the past hour. Victor, she answered. How did it go? He asked for 48 hours. She processed that, to decide whether to cooperate. Yes, and he won't, Victor said. I think he'll spend 48 hours trying to build a counterposition. Probably involving Childs. Probably involving the 3 men inside my organization who have been running communications for him. She stood up from the desk. You know about those 3. Since yesterday. And you're telling me. You should know. He paused. Catherine Park should know. If those 3 are feeding information to Derek, there's a possibility that certain aspects of your legal strategy have been compromised. Things said in calls, documents referenced. I can't say how much they know. Her chest tightened. How serious? Serious enough that you should tell Catherine to treat all prior communication through standard channels as potentially exposed. She walked to the window. The city outside was doing its evening thing lights, traffic, the ambient roar of 8 million people living. She pressed her palm against the glass the way she had the night after the gala in that empty lounge, and the shape of what Derek had done first came fully into view. Victor. She said his name and then didn't immediately say the next thing. She let a second go by. Yes, after the 48 hours. When he doesn't cooperate, what happens to you? The pause before his answer was the precise kind, not uncertain, not evasive. Measured. I give the U.S. attorney what I have, he said. The full financial documentation, the account structures, the routing from the family's accounts through the Marlowe structure. Everything. That implicates your organization, yes. It implicates you. Parts of it, yes. She turned away from the window. She sat back down at her desk and put her elbow on the surface and pressed 2 fingers to her temple and looked at the hotel's spreadsheet without seeing it. You're going to burn it down, she said. I'm going to burn the parts that should have burned a long time ago, he said. She thought about Catherine's warning. Complicated people. Margin. She thought about all the reasons she should hold him at arm's length the 40 years, the organization, the parts of his history that she could only outline in her imagination because she had never worked organized crime cases. She thought about, I cannot walk past this. She thought about her name on 27 documents she had never signed. She thought about 5 years, not 4. She had been counting wrong. It was 5 years since that conference in Chicago, 5 years of a man who had looked at her and seen a function. Be careful, she said. I will, Victor. She paused. What you're doing, I know what it costs. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she had not heard from him before. Not softness exactly, something worn to smoothness by a long time of being pressed against something harder. Go to sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. She almost said something else. She decided against it. She said goodnight and hung up. She sat at her desk in the evening quiet and thought about all of it. Then she opened her laptop and typed a message to Catherine, flagging the communications exposure and recommending they shift to encrypted channels for anything sensitive going forward. Catherine replied in 8 minutes, already setting it up. Also, U.S. Attorney's Office reached out today. They want a preliminary interview. Monday morning. Be ready. Elena read that message twice. Monday morning. 5 days away. The U.S. Attorney's Office had moved faster than she expected, faster than Catherine had projected, faster than Derek's 48-hour window would allow him to build a counterposition. Someone had pushed the timeline forward. She thought about who had made calls that afternoon. Who had a reason to move the federal machinery faster than it would otherwise move? Who understood that 48 hours in Derek Voss's hands was 48 hours too long? She picked up her phone. She typed one message to the unsaved number. Thank you. The reply came after a long pause. Don't thank me yet. She set the phone down. She thought about that, don't thank me yet, and about all the territory those 4 words covered. The 48 hours, the 3 men, the organizations that would fall, the legitimate businesses and the jobs and the real things Victor had built, trying to leave something clean behind him. The U.S. Attorney's Office wanted her Monday morning. Derek had 48 hours. Victor had made calls that afternoon that could not be unmade. Elena Marlowe sat in her apartment in the city that had been her city for 11 years and felt the thing she was inside, close around her like a fist, and she understood fully, without comfort, that there was no longer any version of the next several months that didn't cost something. The only question was what. The weekend before the Monday interview was the quietest Elena had felt since the gala, and she did not trust the quiet. She spent Saturday working through the hotel case, finishing it, actually, which she had not expected to manage, but the focus required to close a case was exactly the kind of focus that pushed everything else to the perimeter, and she needed the perimeter. She filed the completed report to the hotel group's general counsel by 4 in the afternoons and felt the specific emptiness that comes after finishing something demanding. The apartment was very still. Outside, the city ran on without her. She ate. She called no one. She did not check the unsaved number. Sunday she prepared for Monday. Catherine had sent her a 12-page briefing document on the U.S. Attorney's interview process, what to expect, what not to volunteer, how to answer questions that were framed to produce yes or no answers when the honest answer required nuance. Elena read it 3 times. She made notes in the margins with a pen, not a keyboard, because she processed better by hand when the stakes were high. She slept badly, not dramatically badly, not the 2A. M's descent that had hit her the first week. Just the light, fractured sleep of someone who knows tomorrow has weight and cannot entirely let go of that knowledge. She was dressed and at Catherine's office by 7:45 Monday morning. The U.S. Attorney's Office had scheduled the interview for 9. Catherine went over the briefing one more time, standing at the window of her conference room with a coffee she didn't drink, talking through the likely structure of the questions in a voice that was so calm it was almost soporific, which Elena recognized as deliberate. Catherine was calibrating the room. At 8:50 they took a car to the federal building on St. Andrews Plaza. Elena had testified before. She had given depositions, had sat across from regulatory attorneys in rooms exactly like the one she was walked into at 9:04 fluorescent lights, table that was too large for the number of people in it, a recording device on the surface with a small red light. She knew how to be in those rooms. She had trained herself over 11 years to be the most neutral object in any room where information was being extracted. She sat. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. The attorney across from her was a woman named Sarah Dunn, 38 or so, dark hair pulled back, no jewelry that wasn't functional. She had the specific economy of someone who spent most of her professional life in rooms where every word cost something. She introduced herself, stated the case number for the record, and laid out the scope of the interview in 2 clean sentences. Then she said, "Ms. Marlowe, we'd like to start with the incorporation of Marlowe Consulting Partners. Can you describe your involvement in that process?" "I had no involvement," Elena said. "The company was incorporated without my knowledge. The documents bear my name and a forged version of my signature." Dunn nodded. She had clearly already read everything Catherine had filed. The question had been a calibration checking Elena's account against the documentation, seeing whether she was consistent, whether she flinched. Elena did not flinch. They went through the whole structure methodically. The shell companies, the vendor accounts, the routing, the timeline. Elena answered everything she knew from direct evidence and declined to answer 3 questions where her knowledge was inferential rather than documented, and Catherine noted each declination on her legal pad without comment. 40 minutes in, Dunn set down her pen. "Ms. Marlowe, we have documentation indicating that Victor Voss provided you with a forensic signature analysis prior to your retention of counsel. Is that correct?" Elena looked at Catherine. Catherine gave a small, precise nod. "That's correct," Elena said. "And you had direct communication with Victor Voss during the period between the initial gala on the 14th and your first interview with your attorney?" "Yes." "Can you characterize the nature of those communications?" "He provided me with information relevant to understanding how my name had been used without my knowledge. He identified the existence of a forensic analysis of the signature documents. He also flagged that Derek Voss had made contact with a regulatory compliance consultant named Raymond Childs, who had prior involvement in a case I had worked." Dunn wrote something. "Did Victor Voss request anything in exchange for this information?" "No. Nothing. Nothing." Dunn held her gaze for a moment in the way that attorneys do when they want to communicate that they are deciding whether to believe something and the person being asked should understand that. "Ms. Marlowe, are you currently in a personal relationship with Victor Voss?" The question landed in the room without drama. Catherine's pen stopped moving. Elena said, "No, have you been?" "No, the nature of your contact has been exclusively informational," Elena said. "He contacted me because my name was on documents that affected his organization. I contacted him because he had evidence relevant to my legal defense." Dunn made another note. She had a quality of stillness that Elena recognized and respected the stillness of someone who was not rattled by silence and did not feel the need to fill it. They sat in the same quality of stillness for 4 seconds, and then Dunn said, "We may need to speak with you again after we've reviewed additional documentation." "Of course," Elena said. They were out of the building by 10:40. On the sidewalk, Catherine stopped and turned to face her. "You did well. The question about a personal relationships," Elena said. "Someone suggested it to them." "Derek, almost certainly." Catherine's voice was neutral. "It doesn't matter, because it's not true and you answered it clearly and directly. What matters is that they asked it, which means Derek has been in contact with someone inside that office or someone adjacent to it." She paused. "Which means the 48 hours ended and he didn't cooperate." He went sideways. Elena looked at the federal building behind them. The stone facade, the plaza, the flag moving in the cold morning air. She thought about 48 hours. She thought about Victor saying he won't cooperate. She pulled out her phone. She called the unsaved number. It rang 4 times. Then Victor's voice. "How did it go?" "They asked if I was in a personal relationship with you." A brief silence. "He contacted someone." That's what Catherine thinks. He's trying to reframe the evidence source. If the signature analysis came from a woman who's involved with the subject's father, it becomes compromised. Motivated evidence. "I know what he's doing. Are you all right?" The question landed differently than she expected. She was standing on a federal plaza in the cold with Catherine 3 feet away, and she was not all right in the way that she had not been all right for 3 weeks, which was the baseline now, which was the new floor of normal. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She turned away from Catherine slightly. "Call me tonight," she said. "We need to talk about what he's going to do next." "I know what he's going to do next," Victor said. His voice had that quality again, the worn smooth quality, the thing that was not quite tiredness and not quite resignation. "What?" "He's going to go to the waterfront warehouse." She didn't know what that meant. She said, "Explain." "Later," he said. "Tonight," he called it 8. There's a facility on the waterfront in Red Hook, Victor said. An abandoned cold storage building my organization has used intermittently for the past 12 years. Derek knows it. He's been there 3 times that I'm aware of, twice with me, once without. What's there? Documentation I should have destroyed 10 years ago. Physical records from the period when the organization was transitioning certain operations, the late 90s, early 2000s. The kind of records that established connections between the legitimate businesses and the activities I was running before I decided to stop running them. He paused. If Derek retrieves those records and delivers them to someone who can use them against the current investigation, either to muddy the evidentiary picture or to create leverage against me personally, the entire situation changes. Elena was sitting at her kitchen table with a notepad. She wrote Red Hook, cold storage, pre-2000 records. Why haven't you destroyed them? Because I used them 3 years ago to defend against an internal dispute. A man claimed my organization had misrepresented certain asset transfers to him. I needed the original records to prove otherwise. After that dispute resolved, I should have handled it, and I didn't. A pause. Oversight. The kind you don't think about until someone else sees the angle you missed. Does Derek know specifically what's in those records? He knows enough to know they're useful. Whether he knows the full scope, I'm not certain. Can you get there first? I sent 2 men this afternoon. The records are being moved to a secure location. Elena set down her pen. Then what's the problem? The pause before his answer was different from the usual kind. Longer. Waited with something she hadn't heard from him, before a kind of reluctance that had nothing strategic about it. Tommy Greer, he said. One of the 3 men Sal identified as running communications for Derek. I sent him as one of the 2 men to move the records. She understood immediately. Her hand went flat on the notepad. He tipped Derek, she said. I believe so. Yes. When? This afternoon. Shortly after I sent them. So Derek knows the records are being moved. Yes. And he knows where they're being moved to. A pause. Possibly. Greer knew the destination. She stood up from the table. She walked to the window. She pressed her palm to the glass cold from the November air on the other side, and she stood there and thought about the geometry of this. The warehouse in Red Hook, the records. Tommy Greer on a phone, feeding the information forward. Derek on the other end calculating. Victor, she said. Is there anything in those pre-2000 records that could be used to argue that the current legitimate businesses are connected to criminal activity in a way that would invalidate the partnership agreements? The pause. Yes, he said. She closed her eyes. The real estate fund, he said. The original seed capital. Some of it, not all of it, but a documented portion came from sources that would not withstand scrutiny. The partnership agreement has a clean hands clause. If Derek delivers those records to the fund's investors and they trigger the clause, the fund dissolves, the jobs go. The 17 employees who have nothing to do with any of this, and Derek knows this if he's had time to think it through. Yes, she opened her eyes. The city outside was bright and indifferent. She thought about the Monday morning interview, Dunn's question about a personal relationship, Derek's 48 hours spent not cooperating but building. She thought about Sal saying he's not going to cooperate in the quiet hotel room, and Victor saying, I know. He's not trying to defend himself, she said. He's trying to burn everything down if he goes down. He wants to make the damage too large for you to survive alongside him. Either you protect him or everything you've built goes with him. Yes, Victor said. That's what he's doing. And you need to decide tonight whether to let the records reach him or try to intercept. I've already decided, Victor said. I'm going to the warehouse. She turned from the window. Victor, I need to see what Greer took. I need to see what's still there and what isn't. And I need to have a conversation with Tommy Greer that I can't have over a phone. I'm not asking for permission, he said. Not harshly, just plainly. I'm telling you because you asked me to tell you things. She thought about Catherine, about margin, about complicated people in complicated situations. I'm coming, she said. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. This isn't your situation, he said. My name is on 27 documents, she said. Everything in that warehouse that Derek uses to leverage you directly affects my case. If those records muddy the evidentiary picture or create grounds to question your cooperation with the federal inquiry, my defense loses its most credible corroborating source. This is absolutely my situation. Another silence. Then Sal drives. Fine, and you stay in the car. She didn't agree to that. She said, send me the address. Red Hook at 11:30 on a November night was not the neighborhood it had been trying to become over the past decade. The renovation, the restaurants, the people who moved there from other boroughs looking for something the other boroughs had priced them out of, all of that peeled away from the waterfront blocks. What was left at the edges, in the old industrial sections, was the city underneath the city. The buildings that remembered what everything had been for before it got polished. Sal drove a gray sedan with no markings. The large, quiet man from the hotel meeting was in the front passenger seat. Asina was in the back beside Victor, who had not spoken since they picked her up on Atlantic Avenue, except to tell Sal to take the long way around a particular block. She could feel the tension in him. Not agitation. Victor Voss did not do agitation. She was learning. It was more structural than that, the tension. Like a building that knows it's past safe capacity, but hasn't decided where to give yet. The warehouse was at the end of a block that dead-ended at a chain-link fence, beyond which she could see the water black and moving, lit by the lights of the bridge. The building was 3 stories, gray concrete, windows on the upper floors either boarded or broken. A loading dock on the street side with roll-up doors, both closed. Sal pulled to the curb half a block away. He killed the lights. 2 vehicles, the quiet man said. He was looking at the loading dock. Elena followed his sightline. 2 dark SUVs parked close to the building. She hadn't noticed them immediately. Victor looked at them for a moment. Then he said very quietly, he's here already. She felt the air in the car change. He wasn't supposed to know we were coming, Sal said. Greer told him when we were coming, not just where. Victor's voice was flat. Not shocked, she had the impression that Victor Voss had stopped being shocked by betrayal sometime in the previous century. But something in the flatness was harder than usual. We go back, Sal said. We do not go back, Victor said. Victor, there are records in that building that I need before he leaves with them. He reached for the door handle. Sal put his hand on Victor's arm. Elena had not seen anyone do that before. Victor looked at Sal's hand. Then he looked at Sal. 3 minutes, Sal said. Let me call Benny and Marco. We don't go in there 2 men, and he stopped. He hadn't forgotten Elena was in the back seat. He was choosing not to acknowledge it. 4 minutes, Victor said. Make the call. Sal made the call. Elena sat in the car in the dark in Red Hook and looked at the building and thought, this is not what you planned. When she had pulled that ring off her finger in a ballroom and said a liar doesn't deserve my love, she had planned for attorneys and depositions and the long institutional grind of the legal process. She had not planned for a waterfront warehouse at midnight with Sal making calls she couldn't fully hear. Victor turned to look at her. In the dark of the car, his face was just outline and shadow. You should go, he said. You said I could come. I said Sal drives. I didn't plan on Derek being here. Neither did you. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, not worry, exactly. Something that was considering her. You don't carry, he said. I know. You have your phone. Yes. If anything sounds wrong in there, you get out of the car and you walk toward the bridge. You call Catherine Park and you stay on the phone with her until you are in a cab. He held her gaze. You promised me that. She thought about arguing. She thought about Catherine and Margin. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in a car in Red Hook because her name was on 27 documents. And that was the whole truth of how she got here, every step of it, from the rooftop proposal to the federal building to this dark street. I promise, she said. He turned back to the front. 4 minutes later, 2 more men arrived on foot, Benny, lean and 40-ish, and Marco, who was younger and moved like someone who had played sports recently enough to still think about angles. Sal gave them information in low sentences Elena could almost not hear. Then the 4 men went to the building. She sat in the car. She lasted 6 minutes, not because she was reckless. Because at 6 minutes she heard the sound sharp, not quite what she would have called a gunshot, more like a pressure release. But in a building on a dead-end waterfront block at midnight, there was only one category of sound it belonged to. And then she heard voices raised, not screaming, but loud in the specific way of people who have moved past the pretense of a controlled situation. She got out of the car. She went to the loading dock. One of the roll-up doors was raised. 2 feet she went under it and straightened in the dark interior, and her eyes adjusted slowly. Concrete floor, old shelving units, the smell of cold and rust and water. Emergency lighting somewhere above, just enough to turn the dark into deep gray. Voices from the far end of the space, up one level. A metal staircase. She moved toward it. She heard Derek before she saw him. You don't have the authority to do this. His voice was at full force now, no management, no performance. Raw authority that had lost its backing and didn't know it yet. These are organizational assets. I'm a part of this organization's. You stole from this organization. Victor's voice. Steady. You don't get to claim it. She reached the top of the staircase. A large open space, former storage, shelving along 3 walls. Emergency light in the corner. Sal and the quiet man flanked Victor at one end of the space. Derek stood 12 feet away, not alone. 2 men behind him she didn't recognize. Tommy Greer, she assumed, was one of them. And then she saw what was on the floor between them. Filing boxes. 4 of them, open. Documents spread across the concrete in a rough arc. Clearly someone had been going through them fast, pulling specific folders. The boxes that had held the pre-2000 records. Derek saw her. She watched it happen across his face, the recognition, the calculation, the specific recalibrations of someone who has just been handed an unexpected variable. He looked at her and then looked at Victor, and in that fraction of a second, she understood that he was going to use her. Whatever move he made next, he was going to make it through her. She's here, Derek said. Not to anyone specifically. To the room. Like a statement of position. Elena, Victor said without turning. Go back downstairs. She did not move. She was looking at the open filing boxes. At the documents spread across the floor. She was a forensic accountant who had spent 11 years reading documents, and her eyes were moving across the visible pages the way they always moved, systematic, left to right, reading whatever she could see from 12 feet away. She saw her name, not on the documents she had already documented, not on Marlowe Consulting Partners' paperwork, something different. A document with a date in the upper left corner, 1999, and a header she couldn't fully read, and her name, Elena Marlowe, in the body of the text. She was 12 years old in 1999. She crossed the space before anyone had fully processed that she was moving. She went to the documents on the floor and crouched and picked up the page and read it in the emergency light. It was a personnel file. Not hers. She was 12 in 1999. She had no personnel file. It was a file for a woman named Margaret Marlowe. The name stopped her. She read further. Margaret Marlowe, listed as a bookkeeper for an entity called Hargrove Financial Services, 1997 to 2001. Hargrove Financial Services, which Elena recognized from her own research as one of the peripheral entities in the pre-2000 records Victor had described. A company that had been used in that era to move certain funds through certain accounts. Margaret Marlowe, her mother's name. She went cold from the inside. She turned the page over. There was a second sheet, a termination record. Margaret Marlowe, separated from Hargrove Financial Services in March 2001. Reason, discovered accessing restricted account files. Notation in the margin, handwritten, non-disclosure executed. Paid, a number that was not enormous but was not insignificant for 2001. Her mother had signed a non-disclosure agreement with a company connected to Victor Voss's organization. Her mother had been paid to be quiet about something she had seen in those accounts. Her mother had died in 2014. She had left Elena a small amount of money, not much, but it had helped Elena get through the first year of building her client list after the firm dissolved. Elena had assumed the money was savings. Her mother had been careful. Her mother had worked hard. Elena had never questioned it. She stayed crouched on the floor with the document in her hands, and she understood, in the space of about 15 seconds, what she was looking at. Her mother had worked inside a company connected to Victor Voss, had discovered something, had been paid to be quiet. And the money that had helped Elena survive, some of it, possibly, had come from that payment. Derek was watching her. She could feel it. She stood up slowly. She turned around. She looked at Victor. His face told her that he had not known this specific document was here. She was good at reading faces, 11 years of depositions, and she was certain of that reading. He had not known. But the expression she was looking for, the one that would tell her whether he had known about her mother and Hargrove in a more general way, was harder to read. The gray eyes gave her less than she needed. "Did you know?" she said. The room was very quiet. Sal had taken a half step forward. Derek had not moved. The two men behind Derek had not moved. "Did you know my mother worked for Hargrove?" she said. Victor looked at her. The pause before he answered was the longest she had ever given him. "Not until recently," he said. "How recently?" 3 weeks ago. "When I began pulling the full personnel records for the entities in those boxes." 3 weeks ago, she said, which was before the gala. "Yes, and you didn't tell me. You were still assessing," she said. Her voice was level. She had trained her voice to be level in rooms like this. "You were still deciding what to tell me and what to manage." She looked at the document in her hand. "You let me walk into a federal interview this morning without knowing that my mother had a paid non-disclosure agreement with a company connected to your organization." "The NDA was Margaret Marlowe's," he said, "not yours. It creates a connection between my family and your organization that predates me," she said. "If the U.S. Attorney's Office finds this document, it doesn't establish anything about you personally, Mintz. It establishes that the forensic accountant, who is the primary victim in this case, has familial ties to a company that was part of your criminal era holdings." "That's not nothing. That's not—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She felt the thing she had been managing for 3 weeks tip past the edge that she had maintained it behind, and she stood in an abandoned warehouse at midnight with a document in her hand that had her dead mother's name on it, and she stopped talking because if she kept talking, the level voice was going to crack. Derek said from across the room, "There it is." She turned to look at him. He had the expression of someone who has just watched a card fall exactly as he calculated it would fall. Not smug would have been simpler, more ignorable. It was something more specific. The look of a man who had known this document was in those boxes and had understood exactly what it would do when it was found. "He knew," she said. Not to Derek, to Victor. Victor's jaw tightened. "He knew about your mother before the gala," Victor said. "I believe so." "Yes." She looked at Derek. He met her gaze with the same calm she had seen at the charity gala, the performative calm of a man who believes the room is his. "You chose me on purpose," she said, "not just for the clean name. Because you knew about my mother. Because you knew that if any of this came apart, there was a thread that connected me to his organization through her." Derek said nothing. His silence was its own kind of answer. "That's why you were so certain I wouldn't go to an attorney," she said. "You thought that when I found out about my mother, I'd be too scared of the connection to fight back. You thought you had double insurance." Elena Victor started. "Don't," she said. To him. Sharp. He stopped. She stood in the middle of that warehouse, holding a document with her mother's name on it, and she felt the specific shape of the trap she was inside. Derek had constructed it in layers, each one meant to hold even if the outer one failed. She was not just the woman with the forged signature. She was the daughter of a woman who had been paid silence money by an organization that was now cooperating with her federal defense. Any attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office who saw this document would spend considerable time asking questions she did not have clean answers to. She set the document down on top of the open filing box. She looked at Derek. "How long have you known about my mother?" "Long enough," he said, "before you proposed." A beat. Yes. She felt the floor of the last 4 years, the rooftop, the champagne, the skyline drop out from under her again. Not with shock. She was past shock, with the specific nausea of confirmation. "You chose me because of her. I chose you because you were the right person for what I needed," Derek said. The clean name and the family connection were complementary. She heard Sal make a sound, not a word, just a sound, somewhere between disgust and something more dangerous. Victor moved. He crossed the space between himself and Derek in 5 steps, and he stopped 1 foot in front of his son, and he looked at him the way Elena had seen people look at things they can't put back together. "Get out," Victor said. Derek looked at his father. "These records, you are not leaving with those records." Victor's voice had no volume and no warmth, and the quality of something that has reached the end of a very long road. "You are walking out of this building, and you are getting in one of those vehicles, and you are going wherever you go next. And then you are going to retain an attorney, because the call to the U.S. Attorney's Office is happening tonight." Derek looked at the documents on the floor. He looked at his father. He looked at Elena. "You're going to regret this," he said. He had said that before. At the hotel meeting, same words. But it was thinner now. The structure behind it had come apart. "Walk away," Sal said. He was not asking. Derek looked at Tommy Greer. Something passed between them, a look Elena couldn't fully read, fast and layered, and then Derek turned and walked to the staircase and went down it without looking back. His two men followed. The sound of the loading dock door. The sound of vehicles. Then silence. Elena was still standing in the middle of the room. She became aware gradually that she was very cold. The building held the November air like a storage unit was designed to do. Her hands were not shaking, but they felt like they were. Victor turned toward her. She held up one hand, not aggressively. Just stop, he stopped. She looked at the documents on the floor. She looked at the open filing boxes. She thought about her mother, Margaret Marlowe, bookkeeper, 1997 to 2001, non-disclosure executed, and she thought about the small inheritance that had helped her survive a hard year, and she thought about whether her mother had ever meant to tell her. Whether she had carried it as something containable, or whether it had weighed on her the way contained things do. She thought about sitting in Catherine's office that first morning and laying out everything she knew. And how the thing she had not known was the thing she should have known was possible, that the people who had shaped her life had done so with parts she couldn't see. Anything else, she said. Her voice was still level. It cost her. Victor understood what she was asking. Not that I know of. That's not the same as no. No, he said, it isn't. She crouched down and picked up the document with her mother's name on it and held it. I need this for Catherine. Take whatever you need. She took the two sheets, the personnel file and the termination record. She folded them and put them in her coat pocket. She stood. I need to be alone for a few minutes, she said. Victor nodded. He gestured to Sal. The two of them moved toward the staircase and went down. She stood alone in the room with the filing boxes and the scattered documents and the emergency light in the corner. She stood there for 4 minutes exactly because she counted. She looked at nothing in particular. She let the cold air be what it was, and the silence be what it was, and the document in her pocket be what it was. Then she straightened her coat. She walked to the staircase. She went down. In the car, nobody spoke for 6 blocks. Then Sal said, without turning around, "Where'd he take you?" She looked out the window at Brooklyn going past. She thought about her apartment. She thought about Monday's interview and Tuesday's follow-up and the document in her pocket and the call Victor was going to make tonight to the U.S. Attorney's office. She thought about what Derek had built and how long he had been building it and how many layers there were that she still couldn't see. Home, she said. She looked at Victor once briefly in the dark of the car. He was looking straight ahead. His hands were on his knees and his jaw was set, and he looked like a man who had just done something that could not be taken back, which was because he had... She looked away. She took out her phone and typed a message to Catherine's significant development. Need to meet first thing tomorrow. There is a document you need to see before anyone else does. Catherine replied inside 3 minutes. Even at midnight, I'll be in at 7. Bring everything. Elena put the phone away. She pressed her back against the seats and closed her eyes, and the car moved through the Brooklyn streets toward the bridge and across it and back into Manhattan. And she sat in the dark and understood that the thing she was inside had just become something neither she nor Victor nor even Derek could fully control. The document was in her pocket. Her mother's name was on it. The U.S. Attorney's Office would see it by the end of the week because she was going to be the one to show it to them before anyone else could use it as a weapon. That was the only move she had left, and she had already decided to make it. Catherine Park's office at 7 in the morning looked different from the way it looked at 9. The overhead lights were off. She worked by the lamp on her desk and the gray winter light coming through the window, and when Elena walked in and sat down and put the 2 documents on the desk, Catherine read them without speaking for 4 full minutes. Then she set them down. Your mother, she said. Yes. You didn't know. I did not know. Catherine looked at the documents again. Not reading, she had read them. Just looking, the way attorneys look at things when they are deciding what they mean rather than what they say. This doesn't implicate you, I know. Your mother's NDA with Hargrove was her own legal matter. It doesn't transfer. You were 12 years old. I know that too. Elena had her hands flat on her knees. She had slept 3 hours, and she had showered, and she had dressed carefully because walking into a room in crisis required looking like you were not in crisis. What it does is create a narrative that Derek can use. The forensic accountant who built her career on finding financial crimes has familial roots in the exact kind of financial structure she's claiming victimhood from. Any defense attorney worth anything turns that into reasonable doubt. It creates complexity, Catherine said. Not reasonable doubt. There's a difference. In a jury room, Catherine was quiet for a moment. We get ahead of it. We disclose it ourselves proactively before the U.S. Attorney's Office finds it in those warehouse documents. She looked up. Victor Voss made the call last night. He said he was going to. I'll verify this morning. She picked up the documents and squared them against the desk. Elena, the fact that you found this document and brought it to me immediately rather than sitting on it is itself significant. It establishes your consistent pattern of cooperation and transparency. I know why I'm doing it. I know you do. I'm telling you how it looks to the people who matter. Catherine paused. How are you? Elena looked at the lamp on the desk. The small warm circle of light in the gray morning. I keep thinking about whether she meant to tell me, she said. My mother. Whether she was waiting for the right time and the right time never came, or whether she decided I was better off not knowing. She paused. I can't ask her. Catherine didn't say anything to that. She was not a woman who filled silence with comfort, and Elena was grateful for it. What do we do today, Elena said. Today we call Sarah Dunn at the U.S. Attorney's Office and request an urgent supplemental meeting. We walk in with those documents and we tell them we found them, and we tell them the full context, and we put it in the record ourselves. Catherine's voice was even, methodical, the voice of someone who had done this before. We take the weapon out of Derek's hands before he can load it. And if Derek has already been in contact with Dozen Office, then we find out this morning instead of next week. Either way, we know. Elena nodded. Make the call. Sarah Dunn met them at 1 in the afternoon. Same room, same fluorescent light, same recording device with the red light. She read the documents across the table with the same still quality she brought to everything, and Elena watched her face for the tells that even trained attorneys could not fully suppress, and she saw it, a slight change around the eyes when she reached the notation in the margin. Non-disclosure executed, paid. Dunn set the documents down. When did you find these? Last night, Elena said. Approximately 11:30. Where the cold storage facility in Red Hook that Victor Voss's organization has used for document storage. Mr. Voss was in the process of relocating those records to a secure location when it became apparent that Derek Voss had prior knowledge of the relocation and was moving to retrieve specific files. Dunn looked at her. You were present at this facility. Yes. Why? Because I had reason to believe the records being retrieved could be used to compromise the evidentiary picture in my own case. I made the decision to be present as a witness. That was not a safe decision. No, Elena said, it wasn't. Dunn was quiet for a moment. She looked at Catherine. Counselor, your client was present at a location connected to an organized crime organization during what sounds like a direct confrontation between two factions of that organization. My client was present as a private citizen observing a situation that directly affected her legal interests, Catherine said. She was not a participant in any illegal activity. She retrieved documents relevant to her case and brought them immediately to counsel and subsequently to this office. Dunn looked at the documents again. Did Derek Voss retrieve any documents from the facility before departing? Elena thought about the moment. The two men behind Derek. Tommy Greer's face. The look that had passed between Derek and Greer before Derek walked to the staircase. I don't know, she said. I cannot confirm or deny whether he left with anything. When he departed the facility, he had no visible documents in his hands. Whether his associates carried anything out, I couldn't see the full loading dock area. Dunns wrote something. Then she said, We have been in contact with Victor Voss's attorneys this morning. Mr. Voss has confirmed his intent to provide full cooperation with this inquiry and to deliver documentary evidence related to Derek Voss's fraudulent activities. She paused. He has also flagged the Hargrove Financial Services connection to your mother. Elena felt something release in her chest. He had told them first. Before she got here, he had called and disclosed it last night, and by this morning his attorney had flagged it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. She had not known he was going to do that. She should have known, Miss Marlowe, Dunn said. Given the complexity of what's developed, I want to be direct with you. Derek Voss, through his attorney, made contact with this office yesterday afternoon. The room was very still. He's offering a proffer, Dunn said. Catherine's pen stopped. A proffer, Catherine said. The word was careful, controlled. He's offering information about his father's organization in exchange for consideration on the charges he's facing. Dunn's voice was neutral professionally, deliberately neutral. This office has not made any commitments. But I want you to understand the landscape you're operating in. Elena understood the landscape immediately and completely. Derek was not cooperating to clear her. Derek was cooperating to burn Victor. He was going to give the U.S. Attorney's Office everything he knew about his father's organization, 40 years of it, the parts Victor had been trying to move away from in exchange for reduced exposure on the fraud case. And in doing so, he would simultaneously bury his father and reframe himself as the person who exposed a criminal enterprise, not the person who built a fraud structure using his fiancé's name. It was, she thought, a genuinely clever move, the kind of move that required no conscience whatsoever. What happens to my case? She said. Your case as a victim remains intact, Dunn said. The forgery documentation, the signature analysis, your direct testimony, none of that is affected by what Derek Voss offers regarding his father's organization. But the narrative shifts, Elena said. If Derek becomes a cooperating witness, the story becomes about Victor Voss's criminal history. I become a footnote. Dunn looked at her steadily. Ms. Marlowe, what outcome are you seeking? Elena thought about that. About what she had wanted from the night she walked away from Derek at the gala to this fluorescent room on a Tuesday afternoon. She had wanted her name cleared. She had wanted the forgery documented and on record. She had wanted the specific accountability of having it known officially, legally, permanently, that she had not done what those documents said she had done. I want the record to be accurate, she said. I want it established without ambiguity that my name was used without my knowledge or consent, that the signatures were forged, that I had no involvement in Marlowe Consulting Partners or any of its activities. That can be established regardless of what Mr. Voss offers, Dunn said. Then establish it, Elena said. Whatever else happens, whatever Derek offers, whatever Victor's cooperations, looks like I want that record made first. Before anything else. Dunn looked at her for a long moment. Then she wrote something, longer than anything she'd written before. I think we can do that, she said. Victor's attorney called Catherine at 4 that afternoon. His name was Gerald Foss, 62, a man who had spent 30 years in exactly this territory and sounded like it measured, precise, no word wasted. He said Victor was prepared to deliver the full documentary record. He said Victor was prepared to testify if required. He said Victor was also prepared to accept whatever personal consequences followed from the organization's history, which was a sentence that had a specific weight to it that Foss did not try to diminish. Catherine relayed this to Elena in a phone call at 4:45. Elena was at her desk. She had been trying to work on the New Jersey case, the inventory manager, the thorny problem, and had managed 2 hours of actual productivity before the day's events reasserted themselves. He's giving them everything, Elena said. Everything relevant, Catherine said. Foss is a good attorney. He'll manage the scope. But the core of what Victor is offering is genuine. It's the full picture. Derek's proffer won't be worth as much if Victor cooperates first. Exactly. Victor's attorney understands that. Moving quickly is deliberate. Catherine paused. Elena, there's something else. She waited. The 3 men inside Victor's organization who were running communications for Derek Tommy Greer, Luis Cantu, and Marco Bietti. Greer and Cantu have been picked up this morning. Cantu is talking. Elena sat up. What is he saying? Enough. Cantu has confirmed that Derek asked Greer to tip him off about the warehouse relocation. He's also confirmed that Derek made contact with Raymond Childs in the 48-hour window after the hotel meeting, and that Childs was paid to approach someone inside the regulatory agency handling the preliminary inquiry. He paid to suppress the federal investigation. He attempted to, Catherine said. It didn't work. But the attempt itself is an additional charge. Obstruction. A pause. The obstruction charge changes Derek's proffer position significantly. He's no longer offering cooperation from a position of strength. He's offering it to reduce exposure on a case that's gotten substantially worse for him in the last 12 hours. Elena looked at her notepad, the notes from the morning the warehouse, the documents Catherine's office. She had been taking notes all day, the way she always did, filling pages with the architecture of what was happening. Where is Derek now? She said. His attorney's office, as of this afternoon. Catherine's voice shifted slightly. Elena, I want you to stay home tonight. I want you to eat something and sleep more than 3 hours. And I want you to let this machinery run without you in it for 12 hours. You've done what you need to do. The rest is federal process. I know, I mean it. I know you mean it. She ate. She slept 5 hours better than 3, worse than she needed. She woke at 2 in the morning and lay in the dark and thought about her mother. About the woman she had understood Margaret Marlowe to be careful, contained, hardworking, a woman who managed difficult things alone without drama, and about how that understanding was still accurate, just larger now. More complicated. Margaret Marlowe had walked into a situation she didn't fully understand and discovered something she shouldn't have seen and had managed it the only way available to her. She had signed an agreement. She had taken the money. She had used it to build something stable for herself and her daughter. Elena did not judge that. She understood it. What she sat with, in the dark, was the question of whether her mother had known whose name would eventually become useful to Derek Voss. Whether anyone had, whether it was coincidence, the most elaborate possible coincidence, or whether Derek had found the thread between Elena and Hargrove and pulled it deliberately. She fell asleep without answering it. Wednesday came in gray and cold, kind of November day that New York produced without apology. Elena was at her desk by 8. At 8:47, her phone rang, not Victor's number, not Catherine's. A number she didn't recognize, a 202 area code. Washington. She answered. A man introduced himself as Deputy Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Morse. His voice was the voice of institutional authority, not unkind but not warm. The voice of someone who called people to deliver information that had legal weight. He said that as of 7 that morning, Derek Voss had been formally charged. 14 counts: wire fraud, securities fraud, forgery, identity fraud, and obstruction of justice. He said that the charges had been developed in conjunction with evidence provided by Victor Voss's cooperation, the documentary record from the warehouse facility, Elena's own forensic documentation, and a corroborating statement from Luis Cantu. He said that the record establishing Elena Marlowe as a victim, not a participant, had been formally entered. She pressed the phone against her ear and sat very still. He said there would be a press release at noon. He said her attorney had already been notified. He said she might want to prepare for media contact. She said thank you. He said she was welcome and ended the call. She sat at her desk with the phone in her hand and looked at the New Jersey case file open on her screen and felt the specific quiet of a thing that has been running at full speed for weeks suddenly arriving somewhere. Not over. Not the end of anything, really. But a threshold she called Victor. He answered on the second ring. Morse called me, she said. Me as well. His voice was different from any version she had heard before. Not exhausted, exactly. Emptied. The voice of someone who has put down something very heavy and is still feeling where the weight was. How are you, she said. Older, he said. She almost said something about that. She decided against it. What happens now? For you. My attorney and I meet with Morse's office on Friday. We establish the scope of my cooperation and the personal consequences. There will be consequences, I know. Some of what I built, the legitimate structures, some of them may survive the inquiry intact. Some won't. A pause. The real estate fund has already triggered its clean hands clause. Peter Walsh called me this morning. The jobs, she said. 17 people. Walsh is working on a restructure. I can't guarantee the outcome. His voice was flat and factual, and she understood that the flatness was because he had already done whatever internal accounting was necessary and had arrived on the other side of it. I should have been faster. When I found Derek's pattern, I should have moved immediately instead of giving him a chance to do the right thing, she said. He was quiet. You gave him 48 hours because he's your son, she said. I understand that. I think he understood that and used it. That's on him, not on you. I should have been faster, he said again. Not arguing with her, just stating it. She let him state it. Victor, she said. My mother, Linda. I don't know if you knew her. I didn't know her personally, he said. Hargrove had several hundred employees and contractors over 5 years. When I found her name in the records 3 weeks ago, I didn't know she was your mother until I cross-referenced. He paused. When I understood the connection, I should have told you immediately. Yes. I was trying to understand the full picture first. I know. She let a moment go by. I understand why you did it. I don't think you were wrong to want the full picture. I think you were wrong to let me walk into a federal interview without it. Yes, he said, simply. No elaboration. She thought about what Catherine had said the first morning. Complicated people in complicated situations require margin. She thought about how margin was different from distance. Margin was the space you kept so you could see clearly. Distance was what happened when you stopped being honest about why you were keeping it. The press release is at noon, she said. I know. I'm going to have media calls. Probably starting this afternoon. Catherine will handle those. Most of them, not all. She paused. I want to make a statement. Not through Catherine's office. Not through an attorney. My own statement. About what happened and what my name was used for. Victor was quiet for a moment. That's your right. I know it is. I'm telling you because... She stopped. She thought about why she was telling him. Because he was implicated. Because his name would be in whatever statement she made, in context. Because after 3 weeks of him giving her information she needed, it felt like the right thing. Because you're being decent, he said. She thought that was accurate enough. Yes, write what's true, he said. That's all. The press release went out at noon. By 1:15, Elena had 14 missed calls. She returned 2 of them, both journalists she had professional relationships with, both conversations brief and factual. She said she had a statement and she would release it in the morning. She spent the afternoon writing it. It took her 4 drafts in 3 hours. The final version was 4 paragraphs. It said her name had been used without her knowledge or consent. It said she had cooperated fully with the federal investigation from the moment she retained counsel. It said the record had been formally established and she was grateful for the methodical work of the U.S. Attorney's Office. It said that the experience had clarified for her something she already knew professionally, but had needed to learn personally, that financial fraud was never purely financial. It was always an act committed against a person. The money was the mechanism. The person was the target. She sent it to Catherine, who read it and called her back. It's good, Catherine said. Does it need anything? It needs nothing. A pause, it's honest. She sent it to the wire at 8 that evening. At 8:43, her phone buzzed. The unsaved number? I read it. She looked at that for a moment. It's the right statement he sent. She typed, I know. A pause. Then, there's something I need to tell you. In person. Not tonight, you need to sleep, but soon. She looked at the message. She thought about the last 3 weeks. The gala, the lounge, the card, the phone calls, the warehouse. She thought about a man who had said, I cannot walk past this, and had not walked past it, at a cost she was still adding up. She typed, Friday after your meeting with Morse. Friday, he replied. She put the phone down. She finished the glass of water on her desk. She turned off the lamp. She went to bed at 9 and slept 7 hours without interruption, which was the best she had slept since October. Thursday was the day Derek's arraignment was announced. Elena did not attend. Catherine had been clear that her presence would be unnecessary and counterproductive. She stayed at her desk and worked the New Jersey case, which she finished at 2 in the afternoon and sent to the client's general counsel with a cover memo. She allowed herself 10 minutes of simply sitting. She thought about what was in motion, the 14 counts, the proffer that had lost its value when Victor cooperated first, the legitimate businesses, some of which would survive and some of which wouldn't, the 17 people in the real estate fund, Tommy Greer and Luis Cantu, both of whom would face their own consequences. Raymond Childs, whose billing records Catherine's investigator had confirmed and who would be fielding questions of his own from the U.S. Attorney's Office. She thought about her mother, about a woman who had done a hard thing quietly and had kept it quiet for 13 years and had taken it with her when she left. She thought about forgiving that, and she thought forgiving was not precisely the right word. What she felt was something more like recognition. She recognized the decision. She understood the logic. She might have made it herself. At 4:30, Victor's attorney called Catherine with an update from the Friday meeting preparation. Foss had confirmed that Victor was prepared to testify before a grand jury if required. He had confirmed that Victor was also prepared to accept a negotiated resolution on certain historical charges related to the pre-2000 period of the organization's activities. There would be fines. There would likely be a period of supervised release. There would not be, Foss believed, incarceration given Victor's age, his cooperation, and the absence of any violent criminal history. Catherine relayed this to Elena. Elena listened. He's going to be all right, Catherine said. Relatively, Elena said. Relatively, Catherine agreed. Elena looked at the window. November outside, the light going early now the way it did, the city shifting its palette toward gray. Catherine, she said, what do I owe him? Catherine was quiet for a moment. Nothing, she said. Legally, professionally, nothing. He provided information that served his own interests alongside yours. That's not something you owe a debt for. I'm not asking legally. Another silence. Then I'm the wrong person to ask, Catherine said. That's not my territory. Elena thought, no, it was hers. She thought about what she owed and what she felt, and whether those two things needed to be the same. She thought about what it would mean to see him on Friday. Not in a warehouse, not in an attorney's office, not in the backseat of a car in the dark, but deliberately, with time and quiet, knowing what she now knew about both of them and the specific strange territory they had both crossed to get to the other side of the last 3 weeks. She did not know what she would say. That was unusual for her. She was almost always the most prepared person in any room. But Friday was still a day away, and Thursday was not yet done. At 6 that evening, her phone rang. Catherine. Her voice was different from any version Elena had heard, not uncontrolled. Catherine Park did not do uncontrolled, but tighter. Compressed. Derek's attorney just called Morse's office, Catherine said. Ellen went still. He's withdrawing the proffer. She did not speak. He's not cooperating, Catherine said. He's changed his position. He's going to fight the church. Why, Elena said. Not shocked she was past shock, but genuinely asking. Why, with 14 counts, with Victor cooperating, with Cantu talking, and the documentary record already in federal hands, why would Derek Voss decide to fight? His attorney filed a motion this afternoon, Catherine said. He's arguing that the signature analysis provided by Victor Voss was obtained through coercion. That Victor pressured his son into a fraudulent scheme and is now using Elena Marlowe as a vehicle to destroy Derek in order to protect himself. The room was very quiet. He's flipping it, Elena said. He's flipping it completely. In his version, Victor is the architect. Derek was following orders, and you, Catherine stopped. And I, Elena said, his filing names you as a knowing participant. It alleges that you were aware of the Hargrove connection through your mother and used that knowledge to facilitate a relationship with Victor Voss that allowed you both to frame Derek for crimes he committed under duress. Elena stood up from her desk. She walked to the window. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. He's accusing me of conspiring with Victor, she said. Yes, based on a Hargrove document. Your mother's NDA. Your presence at the warehouse last night. Your communications with Victor over the past 3 weeks. Catherine's voice was steady, but the steadiness was working harder than usual. He has enough circumstantial connective tissue to make the allegation. He can't prove it. But he doesn't need to prove it in a filing. He needs to create enough confusion that the evidentiary picture clouds. Elena stood at the window. The city below was running. The ordinary world. She thought about the morning she had called Catherine for the first time, the manufacturing firm, the hotel case, rebuilding her client list after a firm dissolved. The ordinary world of her career. She thought about the morning she had read the press release and had 14 missed calls. The ordinary world falling away. She thought about Derek, somewhere in this city, sitting with and filed a motion that turned her from a victim into a conspirator. She thought about the specific calculation required to do that, to look at a woman you had proposed to on a rooftop and decide that the cleanest remaining path ran directly through her. She thought about the ring on the waiter's tray. She thought, he still thinks I'm manageable. What do we do, she said. Catherine said, we fight it. How? We establish timeline, Catherine said. Her voice had lost the compression. She was in motion now, the way she got when there was a clear action to take. We document every communication between you and Victor with timestamps and context that demonstrates the informational, not conspiratorial, nature of the relationship. We cross-reference the Hargrove document against your mother's employment history and demonstrate that you had no access to that information. We pull your financial records and demonstrate that you received no money, no benefit, no consideration from Victor Voss or any entity connected to his organization. And if Derek's attorney files additional motions before we get that documentation in front of Morse. I'm calling Morse tonight. Tonight, Elena. He's going to hear this from us before he reads Derek's attorney's press release tomorrow morning. Elena turned away from the window. She looked at her desk, the notepad, the New Jersey file, the lamp she had turned back on at some point during the call without noticing. She looked at her hands. They were steady. They were always steady. She had trained them to be steady. "Make the call," she said. "I'm already dialing," Catherine said. Elena held the phone and listened to Catherine's shift lines, and then she heard the ring on Morse's direct number, and she stood in her apartment at 6:20 on a Thursday evening and understood that the machinery that had been running for 3 weeks was not winding down. It was accelerating. Derek had made his final move. Not a retreat, not a negotiation, an attack. He had turned the whole architecture of the case inside out and pointed it at the two people who had dismantled him, and he had done it with enough constructed logic that it could not be simply ignored. Catherine was speaking to Morse's assistant now, voice calm and clear and certain. Elena put the phone down on her desk. She picked up a pen. She opened the notepad to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote what they can prove, what they cannot, what we need. She had been in cases like this before, not personally, never personally, but professionally. She had sat across from people who had built narratives designed to survive contact with evidence, and she knew how they worked. She knew what they required. She knew their weaknesses. Derek's narrative required her to have known about Hargrove. She had not known. That was a provable negative, not easy, but provable through her mother's financial records, through her own records, through the specific paper trail of a woman who had received a modest inheritance and had spent every dollar of it on documented, traceable, ordinary expenses over the course of 2 years. She started writing. She wrote for 40 minutes, filling 3 pages, building the counter-architecture the way she built every case from the evidence outward, not from the conclusion backward. She wrote until her hand ached and her eyes burned, and the lamplight felt insufficient. Then she stopped. She looked at what she had. It was enough. Not everything she would need Catherine to build the legal structure around it, would need to pull the financial records, would need to be interviewed again in that fluorescent room with the red recording light. But the core of it was there. The facts were facts. The timeline was the timeline. Her phone buzzed on the desk. The unsaved number. Derek filed a motion. "I know," my attorney called. She looked at the message. "He named you as a co-conspirator." "I know," she typed. "This is because of me. This is the consequence of my involvement in your case." She read that twice. She thought about what it meant that he was telling her this, was naming it directly rather than managing around it. That he understood the shape of what he had brought into her life by choosing to help her. She typed, "You knew this was a possible outcome." "Yes." "And you helped me anyway," a pause. "Then yes." She looked at that. She thought about a man who had said he was making his last decision as the man he used to be, who had called the U.S. Attorney's Office the same night he had told her he was going to, who had disclosed her mother's connection to Hargrove before she could even get to Catherine's office, who had, at every point where he could have managed the situation by withholding something, chosen instead to give her what she needed. She thought about what Catherine had said. He has his own reasons for everything he does. True. And she thought about what was also true, that having reasons did not make a thing less real. She typed, "Friday. We still meet." A longer pause than usual. "Are you sure?" She looked at the question. She thought about all the reasons she should not be sure. The complications, the federal case, Catherine's voice saying margin. She thought about all of it as a stack of reasons, and then she thought about the warehouse and the ring on the waiter's tray, and what it had felt like to stand in a room at the plaza with 400 people and know she was completely alone, and then to walk 30 feet and collide with someone who looked at her and said, "You are not fine, but you will be." "I'm sure," she typed. She put the phone face down on the desk. She picked up the pen. She had 3 more pages to write before she could sleep, and Derek Voss had just made the next 48 hours the most consequential of everything that had come before. And Elena Marlowe was not a woman who arrived at consequential moments unprepared. She wrote, Catherine called Morse at 6:20 and reached him directly, which told Elena something about how seriously the U.S. Attorney's Office was treating the case by that point. The call lasted 22 minutes. Elena sat at her desk and wrote her 3 pages and listened to the half of the conversation. She could hear Catherine's voice through the wall of the adjacent room, steady, precise, laying out the timeline and the documentation and the specific impossibility of the conspiracy allegation with the methodical patience of someone who had done this before and knew that patience was the only thing that worked. When Catherine came back, she sat down across from Elena and said, "Morse is not buying it." Derek's version, he's not buying it. But he has to receive it and process it formally. That's the machine it doesn't get, to say the allegation is ridiculous, and close the file. It has to document the response. How long? He wants a supplemental interview. Both of us his office Friday morning. Catherine looked at her. "Your Friday meeting with Victor afternoon," Elena said. "I'll move it to afternoon." Catherine studied her face for a moment. The lamp between them threw shadows that made her expression harder to read, which was probably appropriate. "Elena, Derek's filing names Victor as the architect of the original fraud. If that allegation has any traction, it doesn't. If it finds a corner to stand in, it doesn't have one," Elena said. "The documentary record establishes the timeline. Victor's cooperation preceded Derek's filing by 36 hours. The signature analysis was authenticated independently. The Cantu statement is corroborated." She looked at her notepad. "Derek is trying to survive by creating noise. Noise is not evidence." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You're more confident than I am." "I've been in this territory before," Elena said, "professionally. The move Derek is making, it's a standard late-stage tactic when the primary defense collapses. You flip the narrative. You name everyone adjacent as co-conspirators. You create a cloud. It buys time and sometimes it buys doubt." She paused. "But it requires the underlying allegation to be plausible. And this one isn't. It requires me to have known about Hargrove through my mother and use that knowledge to cultivate a relationship with Victor and coordinate a fraudulent evidence scheme. All of that before the gala. All of that while I was his fiancée." She set down her pen. "Any reasonable person who spends 20 minutes with the timeline sees that it doesn't hold. Reasonable people on juries have surprised me before." "This doesn't get to a jury," Elena said. "Morse will see it in the documents." Catherine looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded not agreement exactly. The nods of someone who was deciding to trust a judgment they couldn't fully verify. "Get some sleep," she said. Elena got some sleep. Friday morning came in with cold, clear light, the first genuinely clear day in 2 weeks, and Elena walked into the federal building at 8:55 with Catherine beside her and the 3 pages of notes in a folder in her hand. The supplemental interview lasted 3 hours. Morse conducted it himself this time, not Dunn, which was either significant or simply a matter of scheduling, and she decided not to read too much into it. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, a man who had spent his career in rooms exactly like this one and had developed the specific quality of complete attentiveness. When he was looking at you, he was looking at all of you, nothing in the room competing with you for his focus. He went through Derek's filing line by line. He asked Elena about every allegation. She answered each one the same way she had answered the questions in the first interview, factually, specifically, with documentation where documentation existed, and a clear statement of the limits of her knowledge where it didn't. When they reached the allegation about her mother and Hargrove, Elena said, "I am prepared to provide full access to my mother's estate documents, my own financial records for the period of the inheritance, and any communications I have in any form that might establish either the presence or absence of prior knowledge. I will give you everything. I have nothing to hide because there is nothing to find." Morse looked at her. "That's a significant offer." "It's an accurate one," she said. He wrote for a moment. Then he looked up. "Ms. Marlowe, Derek Voss's attorney has argued that your presence at the Red Hook facility on Tuesday evening demonstrates your active participation in what he characterizes as a coordinated effort to retrieve and potentially destroy documentary evidence." "I retrieved one document," Elena said. "I brought it directly to my attorney and subsequently to this office the following morning. If that constitutes participation in a destruction effort, it's the least effective destruction effort in the history of organized crime." Something moved across Morse's face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. He wrote something down. The interview ended at 12:08. Morse walked them to the elevator himself, which he had not done before. At the elevator, he stopped and said, "Ms. Marlowe, the filing Derek Voss made yesterday is a legal instrument. It will be processed and responded to through the appropriate channels. I want you to understand that the evidentiary record in this case does not support its central allegations. She looked at him. I know. I'm telling you officially. Thank you, she said, officially. The elevator came. She and Catherine rode down in silence. On the plaza outside, the cold, clear air hit her face and she stood there for a moment with her eyes closed, just feeling it. The sun was actually present low November sun. Not warm exactly, but visible, which felt like something. Well, Catherine said. Well, Elena said. Derek's filing is going to be rejected, Catherine said. Not today. Maybe not this week. But it's going to be rejected and the charges against him are going to proceed. I know, your name is clean, almost, Elena said. Officially soon. Catherine looked at her. Almost officially isn't bad for 3 weeks' work. Lane almost smiled. No, it isn't. She called Victor from the plaza. He answered on the first ring. 2 o'clock, she said. Can you do 2 o'clock? Yes, there's a coffee shop on West 22nd. Called Meridian. She paused. I know the name is unfortunate. A silence. Then quietly 2 o'clock. She got there first. She always got places first. It was a professional habit. Being in the room before the other person. Understanding the space before the dynamic began. She took a table in the back corner, ordered coffee she didn't plan to drink much of, and sat with her coat on for a few minutes before she took it off. The coffee shop was quiet at 2 on a Friday. A woman at the counter working on something on a laptop. 2 older men near the window with newspapers they weren't reading. The ordinary world. Victor came in at 1:58. He spotted her immediately. She was not hard to spot when she wanted to be found, and he came to the table without stopping at the counter and sat down across from her. He looked different in daylight. She had seen him in ballroom light and car darkness and warehouse emergency light and the fluorescent efficiency of attorney offices, but not like this gray afternoon light through a coffee shop window, no ambient drama. He looked his age, which she had not fully registered before, not diminished by it, just present in it, the way certain people are fully present in their age without apology or performance. He looked tired, not broken. Tired. He sat down and folded his hands on the table and said, How did the interview go? Morse told me officially that the evidentiary record doesn't support Derek's allegations. Victor's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Just that a fraction, and then they were level again. But she had seen it. Good, he said. Your meeting this morning? Gerald is skilled, he said. The terms of cooperation are largely settled. There will be a formal agreement next week. He looked at his hands. The real estate fund Walsh has found a buyer for the underlying assets. The 17 employees have been offered positions with the acquiring company. 14 of them accepted as of this morning. And the other 3? Severance. Good severance. He looked up. I made sure. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she could say about the cost, about the 17 people, about the 40 years, and what they had come to. She thought about all of it as things that were true and that he already knew and that saying would not help. She said, Tell me what you needed to tell me, in person. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table, then back at her. After this resolves, after the federal agreement is signed, and the charges against Derek have proceeded, and your name is formally cleared, I intend to leave New York. She waited. Not immediately. There are conditions attached to the cooperation that require my presence in the jurisdiction for a period of time. Supervised release in all likelihood. But after that period, he paused. I have a property in Vermont. I bought it 12 years ago, and I have spent perhaps 4 weeks there in 12 years. It was meant to be stopped. He started again. I bought it thinking I would eventually stop, eventually slow down, eventually find out what I was when I wasn't running something. He looked at her. I never found out, and now you're going to, she said. Now I don't have a choice. He said it without bitterness. Just fact, which is its own kind of answer. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The ceramic was warm. She looked at him across the table at the gray eyes and the lines of his face and the hands folded on the table with the specific stillness of someone who had learned, over a long life, that stillness was not the same as passivity. I want to tell you something, she said. And I need you to just receive it, not manage it. He looked at her. All right. What you did providing the signature analysis, the child's connection, the warehouse, the call to Morse, the night before I got there, all of it. You did those things at a cost to yourself that was not theoretical. You gave the federal government a roadmap to your organization because a woman you met 3 weeks ago had her name on documents she never signed. He started to say something. I said, "Receive it," she said. He closed his mouth. "I know you had reasons," she said. "I know it served your interest to remove debt from the equation. I know the cooperation was partly strategic. I'm not naive about that, and I'm not pretending otherwise." She held his gaze. "And I also know that complicated things can be true at the same time. You could have managed this in ways that were strategically equivalent without the level of transparency you chose. You told me things you didn't have to tell me. You told me about Hargrove before the federal interview. You disclosed my mother's connection before I could be blindsided by it." She paused. "You treated me like someone who deserved to know the truth, in the middle of a situation where most people were treating me like a variable to be managed." The coffee shop was quiet around them. "That matters to me," she said. "I want you to know that it matters." Victor looked at her for a long moment. His expression was not what she expected, not relieved, not moved in any visible dramatic way. It was something quieter, the expression of someone who has been carrying a particular weight and has just been told that the carrying was seen. "Your mother." She waited. "I didn't know her," he said. "I want to be clear about that. She was one of hundreds of people who worked in that period for entities connected to my organization. She found something, and the way it was handled paying her, the NAA that was standard practice in that era, and it was wrong. It was wrong then, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway because it was convenient." He held her gaze. "I can't apologize to her, I can tell you." "I know," she said. "Does it," he stopped. "Does it what? Does it change what you think about all of this?" She thought about her mother, about the careful, contained woman who had managed a hard thing quietly and used the money for something good and had never told her daughter, and was now beyond being asked about it. She thought about judgment, about what judgment required and what it was worth, and who had the standing to deliver it. "My mother made a decision that protected her, and indirectly protected me," she said. "You made a decision that was expedient, and that hurt her. Both of those things are true." She looked at him. "I'm not here to adjudicate the past. I'm here because of what happened in the present. And in the present you chose differently." He was quiet. "People can choose differently," she said. "That's the whole thing. That's what makes any of this worth the trouble." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not broke, not opened dramatically. Just settled, the way a building settles when the stress is redistributed correctly. "Vermont," she said. "Vermont," he confirmed. "What's in Vermont?" "Besides the property. At this point," he paused. "Which is what I intend to fill in slowly." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about her own filling in the foundation she had been thinking about for years. The idea she carried since the Meridian case, when she had sat with a woman who had lost her retirement savings to a fraud scheme and had thought, someone should have been watching for this earlier. Someone should have been standing at the point of entry, not the exit. "I've been thinking about a foundation," she said. "For the past few years, loosely. People who have been financially victimized, not just fraud cases. Financial abuse in domestic situations, exploitation of older adults, manipulation schemes that target people who don't understand what's being done to their accounts." She paused. "After this, after my name is fully cleared and the case resolves, I think I'm going to do it." He looked at her with the focused attention he brought to things he was genuinely interested in, which he had learned to distinguish from the performance of interest that other people produce. "You'd be good at it," he said. "I'd be very good at it," she said. No modesty about it. She was past modesty about her own competence. Something that was not quite a smile moved across his face. "Yes," he said. "You would." They sat with their coffee for a few minutes without talking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had been running at full speed toward the same point from different directions, and had arrived and were now simply sitting with that. Then she said, "After Vermont settles, after the supervised release, and the formal agreement and all of it, what do you want?" He looked at her steadily. "I want to find out who I am when I'm not running something. And if that person is someone you don't recognize. Then I get to know him," he said, "which is more than I've had." She thought about that, about the specific courage required not of dramatic action, but of stillness of stopping, and letting yourself be seen in the quiet without the machinery running around you. "Victor," she said, "yes, when the supervised release ends. When you've been in Vermont long enough to know what it is. She stopped. She chose the words carefully, the way she always chose words when they mattered. I'd like to not lose the conversation, he looked at her. The gray eyes held hers without hurry. The conversation, he said. Whatever this is, she said. The version of talking to each other that doesn't involve attorneys or federal buildings or warehouses at midnight. She paused. I'd like to find out what that looks like. He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she felt the edge of it, the possibility that she had read something wrong, had named something that existed only on her side of the table. She had been wrong about a man before. She knew what that felt like. She was willing to be wrong again if the alternative was not saying the thing. Then he said, I would like that too. Simple, no performance. No management. She nodded. She picked up her coffee cup and drank what was left of it, which was cold, but she didn't mind. She looked out the window at West 22nd Street, at the November afternoon light getting low, the city running past the glass in both directions. I have a foundation to start building, she said. And I have a federal agreement to sign, he said. We're both very busy people. We always were. She put on her coat. He stood when she stood in old-world courtesy. She had noticed the first time in the Plaza Lounge and had noticed every time since. She picked up her bag. She looked at him across the table. Take care of yourself in Vermont, she said. I intend to try, he said. She walked out of the coffee shop into the cold, clear afternoon. The federal agreement was signed the following Thursday. Victor Voss entered a negotiated cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office admitting to a range of historical financial crimes connected to the pre-2000 period of his organization's activities. He was assessed substantial fines. He was placed on 3 years of supervised release. He was not incarcerated in consideration of his age, his cooperation, and the absence of any violent criminal history in his record. His legitimate businesses were formally separated from the inquiry. The logistics partnership survived intact. The security consulting group survived intact. The real estate fund was sold to the acquiring company, and 14 of its 17 employees transferred with their positions. 3 weeks after the agreement was signed, the U.S. Attorney's Office formally rejected Derek's conspiracy filing. The evidentiary record, Morse's office stated in a terse 2-paragraph response, did not support the allegations. The record was clear. Elena Marlowe had been a victim of identity fraud and forgery, cooperated fully and transparently with the federal investigation from the moment of retaining counsel, and had no prior knowledge of or involvement in Marlowe Consulting Partners or its activities. Elena read that paragraph 3 times, not because she doubted it, because she had been waiting for the specific weight of it, the official, recorded, permanent weight, and she wanted to feel it land. It landed. Derek's trial date was set for the following March. His attorney continued to file motions, each one less architecturally sound than the last. Elena tracked the filings the way she tracked any case methodically, without emotion, because emotion was not useful in the analysis phase, and the analysis phase was the one she understood best. In December, she registered the foundation. She called it the Marlowe Financial Advocacy Foundation, which was not subtle and which she did not care about being subtle about. She rented a small office in Midtown, hired a program director who had worked for 5 years in elder financial abuse prevention, and began the grant application process for the first round of operating funding. 2 of her former clients contributed before she had finished filing the paperwork, which told her something about the need she was addressing and about the reputation she had built. She worked harder than she had in years, which was saying something. The foundation required a different kind of attention from forensic accounting, not less analytical, but differently angled. She was building something forward-facing, rather than looking backward at the evidence of what had already happened. She found to her surprise that she liked it, that the combination of the two, her existing casework and the foundation's advocacy, felt like the thing she had been building toward without fully knowing it. She called her mother's oldest friend in February, a woman named Dorothy who had known Margaret Marlowe since their 20s and who received Elena's call with the warm carefulness of someone who had been waiting for it. Elena told her what she had found in the warehouse. The Hargrove document, the non-disclosure. She told Dorothy she wasn't calling to assign blame or to ask for justification. She said she was calling because she needed to understand, as much as was still possible to understand, who her mother had been in that moment. Dorothy was quiet for a while. Then she said she was scared. She had a young daughter and a job she couldn't lose, and she had found something that frightened her. She did what she thought would keep you both safe. Did she ever talk about it? Once, Dorothy said. Years later, she said she had done something she wasn't proud of, and she had used the money carefully, and she hoped it had been worth it. A pause. She said she'd raised you to be someone who would have done it differently. And she was proud of that, even though she knew you'd never know why. Elena sat with that, in her office, winter light coming through the window, the sounds of the Foundation's first week of operation outside the closed door. She was right, Elena said. I would have done it differently. I know, Dorothy said. She knew too. They talked for another 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with Hargrove or the NDA, about Dorothy's garden, about a trip she was planning, about the specific joy of being old enough to say exactly what you meant without worrying about the impression. Elena listened. She laughed twice. She said she would call again. She meant it. March came. Derek's trial began. Elena testified for 4 hours over 2 days. She sat in the witness box in the federal courthouse and answered questions from the prosecution and from Derek's attorney with the same levelness she had brought to every room in the past several months. And she looked at Derek twice during that time, once when she entered the courtroom, once when she was leaving after the second day, and both times he looked back at her with an expression she could not fully categorize. Not quite anger, not quite defeat. Something in between that she thought might be the specific face a person makes when they finally understand that what they chose to do with someone's trust was the thing that defined them. She did not feel satisfaction at it. She did not feel much of anything, looking at him beyond the distant recognition that she had once loved this man, and that the love had been real even if everything he had offered in exchange for it had been constructed. Victor testified on the 3rd day of trial. Elena was not in the courtroom for that. She watched the news coverage that evening, a single clip from outside the courthouse. Victor in a dark coat walking without hurrying, Foss at his shoulder, saying nothing to the reporters who called his name. He looked old in the television light, and composed in a way that had nothing performative about it, the composure of someone who has decided what they are willing to carry and has set down the rest. The jury deliberated for 6 days. On the 7th day, they returned a verdict of guilty on 11 of the 14 counts. 3 of the fraud counts were dismissed on technical evidentiary grounds minor in the scale of what remained, but Derek's attorney declared it a partial victory, which was the kind of statement that only made sense to the person making it. Elena was in her office when the verdict came through. She was reviewing grant applications for the Foundation's first round of funding. She read the news alert on her phone and set the phone down and went back to the grant applications. Sentencing was set for June. Spring came to New York the way it always did, grudgingly at first, and then all at once. Elena ran in Riverside Park in the mornings when she had time, which was not often but was more than it had been. She was sleeping better. Not perfectly, she did not think she would ever sleep the way she had slept before the gala, with the uncomplicated ease of someone who did not know what she now knew. But better, functionally better. She heard from Victor by letter in April. Actual letter handwritten, mailed from a town in Vermont she had to look up on a map. The letter was 2 pages, written in a hand that was smaller than she expected, careful and precise, each word given its space. He wrote about the property, about the fact that it was larger than he remembered and quieter than he was accustomed to, and that the quiet had taken getting used to. He wrote about a set of bookshelves he had been building in what would eventually be a study, which he had not built furniture in 40 years, and which was going worse than expected. He wrote about the view from the east-facing window in the morning, which he had watched every day for 3 weeks now, and which was different every time. He wrote near the end, I am finding out who I am when I am not running something. It is taking longer than I expected, and is more uncomfortable than I anticipated, and I think that is appropriate. He wrote, I hope the Foundation is building well. I think it will. He wrote at the very end, the conversation continues if you want it to. She read the letter at her kitchen table on a Sunday morning. She read it twice. Then she went to her desk and took out actual paper. She had to look for it, and she sat down and wrote back. She told him about the Foundation, about the program director, about the first 3 cases they had taken on an elderly woman in Queens whose nephew had redirected her savings through a series of shell accounts, a small business owner in the Bronx who had been defrauded by a payroll service, and a woman in her 40s in Staten Island whose ex-husband had spent 4 years hiding marital assets through a structure that bore a striking and non-coincidental resemblance to Marlowe Consulting Partners. She told him that the last case had made her laugh, which was not the appropriate response, and she had laughed anyway. She told him about Dorothy, about what Dorothy had said about her mother. She told him that she had gone to the cemetery once in February and had stood at her mother's grave in the cold and had not known what to say, and so had said nothing, and had stood there for 20 minutes in the silence and had decided that was sufficient. That some things did not require words. That presence was its own statement. She told him that Derek's sentencing was in June, and she did not plan to attend but would read the outcome. She told him she had started sleeping better. She wrote, "Near the end, I hope the bookshelves are going less badly. I think the struggling with them is part of the point." She wrote, "The conversation continues." She mailed it on Monday morning on her way to the office. In June, Derek Voss was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, with eligibility for supervised release after 5. His attorney filed notice of appeal. The appeal would take years and would almost certainly change nothing. Elena read the sentencing report on a Tuesday afternoon. She read it carefully, the way she read everything for what it said and for what it meant and for what the difference between those two things was. When she finished, she closed the browser tab and opened the Foundation's case management system and looked at the 3 active cases and the 2 new referrals that had come in that week. She had work to do. She did the work. In August, when the summer had settled into the particular heavy heat of late New York August, she drove north on a Saturday. She did not call ahead. That was intentional. She had thought about whether to call and had decided that calling ahead turned the visit into a performance. And she did not want a performance. She wanted to see what Vermont actually was when it was not arranged. She drove 3.5 hours and turned off the main road onto a gravel drive that ran through trees for about a quarter mile before opening into a clearing where a low, wide house sat with the east-facing window she recognized from the letter. Victor was in the yard when she pulled in. He was carrying what appeared to be a section of lumber, wearing clothes she had never seen him in older clothes, practical clothes, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He stopped when he saw the car. He set the lumber down. She got out and stood by the car and looked at him across the clearing. "You didn't call?" he said. "No," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face that she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, to see. Not the managed version of his expression, not the public version. The actual version, the version that belonged to a man standing in a yard in August, with his sleeves rolled up and felt complicated history behind him, and a woman he had not expected today, but was not sorry to see. "I made coffee," he said. "Good," she said. She walked across the clearing toward the house. The east-facing window she found was exactly as the letter had described. The view was different from anything Manhattan offered, not dramatic, not the skyline or the river or the particular electric beauty of the city at night. It was quieter than that. Trees, and the way the light moved through them, and the sound of birds that she did not know the names of, and the silence underneath all of it that was not empty but full, in the way that certain silences are full. They drank coffee at a table near that window. They talked for 3 hours not about the case, not about Derek or Morse or the federal agreement. About the Foundation's case management system, which she was in the process of upgrading. About the bookshelves, which were finished and which were, she had to admit, better than expected. About Dorothy and the garden. About a book he had read twice in the past month that he thought she should read, and about why she disagreed with his assessment of it before she had read it, and about the specific pleasure of disagreeing with someone who could hold their position without needing to win. The afternoon light moved across the east-facing window while they talked. It changed color as it moved, that long August afternoon light that takes its time, that does not rush toward evening. They were not the same people they had been at the plaza. That was not possible, and she did not want it, she had learned. In the months since the gala, that sameness was not the goal. The goal was something harder and more honest than sameness. The goal was to be the person the experience had made you, and to find out whether that person was worth knowing and worth being known by. She thought she was. She thought he might be. That was not a certainty. It was a possibility that they had between them earned the right to find out. She left at 6 before the drive back went dark. He walked her to her car. They stood in the clearing with the evening coming on through the trees, and she looked at him in the particular light of a summer evening ending and thought about everything the past 8 months had contained and how much of it she would not have chosen and how none of that was the same as saying it had not been worth it. The foundation is having its first fundraising event in October, she said. If you're in the city. I'll be in the city, he said. Then I'll see you in October. She got in the car. She drove down the gravel road through the trees and out onto the main road and turned south toward the city. She drove with the windows down for the first hour. The August air came in warm and moving, and she let it. She thought about her mother, briefly about a woman who had done what she could with what she had, and had loved her daughter carefully, and had hoped the money was worth it. It was worth it. Not in the way Margaret Marlowe could have predicted, not toward the things she had probably imagined when she signed the NDA in a room she had not expected to be in. But worth it. Elena was certain of that. She drove south through the long summer evening. The city was 3 hours ahead of her, waiting the way it always waited, loud, indifferent, present, alive. She had work to do in it. She had always had work to do in it. She had started the drive north with a question about what she was going toward. She drove south knowing. That was enough. For now, it was more than enough, and she held it carefully, the way you hold something that is real and fragile and not yet fully named. And she drove through the August dark, toward everything that came next.